This page is the front cover of N64 Magazine, issue 59 from October 2001. Blimey, that takes me back. Right there at the top it's shouting about winning a GameCube, which was the hot new console at the time, wasn't it? Still got my old cube tucked away somewhere. The main image is this rather angular-looking lady wielding swords. She's from Galleon, which they're billing as a GameCube world first. 6-page preview. Bit cheeky putting a GameCube game all over the cover of an N64 mag, but times were changing. The writing was on the wall for the old 64. There's a big splash for SSX Tricky, another huge exclusive, promising first ever pics, see page 6. SSX Tricky, yeah, that was the business, proper snowboarding fun. And underneath they say they've overloaded on a load of games, listing Turok Evolution, Rogue Squadron 2, Smash Bros, Wave Race, Blue Storm, Animal Leader, and Animal Forest Plus. Smash Bros and Rogue Squadron 2 were probably still getting a lot of buzz back then. Animal Forest, that's Animal Crossing as we know it now. Clever clogs they were to get in on that early. Down in the corner they've got Plus, Game Boy Super Street Fighter 2, talking about SNES magic on your GB Advance. Super Street Fighter 2 on the Game Boy Advance, now that was something, bringing those SNES classics to the handheld. Mario Kart on GBA is also flagged as a first review, saying we road test Nintendo's stunning handheld racer. Mario Kart GBA, that was pretty decent for a handheld racer back in the day. Overall, a busy cover, trying to cover all the bases, N64, GameCube and Game Boy Advance, all vying for attention back then. This page is the front cover of N64 Magazine, issue 59, from October 2001. It's all about welcoming you to the mag, and banging on about the future, which of course back then meant the GameCube was just around the corner. They're claiming to be Britain's biggest and best-selling Nintendo mag, as you do. They make a point about the N64 being 6 years old in Japan and all its innovations. Yeah, the controller was something else alright. The big news is the GameCube is nearly here, and they'll be covering it. Looking at the little circles, they've got previews for SSX Tricky, Turok Evolution, Wave Race, Blue Storm, Galleon, Mario Kart Super Circuit, and Super Street Fighter 2. Decent lineup to be fair, a bit of everything. And they're saying the next issue is out on Monday the 24th of September, which is a bit of a cock-up considering it's the October issue. Someone's had a right mare there. There's the usual staff list down the side, recognise a few names from back in the day. This page is the contents page for issue 59 of N64 Magazine, dated October 2001. Right at the top, it's got the big contents in red lettering, can't miss that. Then, it's broken down into sections. First up is Planet 64 Feet, which covers the news desk on page 12, saying something about Spaceworld being a big deal for Nintendo. Then there's Coming Soon, on page 20, promising new screenshots of upcoming GameCube titles. Next section is Special Investigation, which is all about Galleon, on page 48. It mentions exclusive info from the creator of Lara Croft about this new game. Sounds intriguing, if a bit late in the N64's life, given the GameCube was just around the corner then. Under Regulars, it's got issue 60 feet on page 96 teasing what's in next month's magazine. Then, N64 feet on page 98, checking out some new interweb thing, whatever that was back then. And finally, New Look on page 17, saying they're changing things up next month, and we're supposed to love it, cheeky sods. Game-wise, they're hyping Turok Evolution for the GameCube, calling it a dinosaur hunter, Super Smash Bros. Melee also for GameCube, calling it a next-gen scrapper, and Wave Race Blue Storm, again for GameCube, saying it's a water treat. Seems like they are really pushing the GameCube already, even though this is an N64 mag, bless them. There's also a big focus on this Galleon game, with a few screenshots showing some pirate-looking bloke and a woman with swords. Looks alright, I suppose. All in all, a typical contents page, letting you know what's inside this issue. This page is the contents page, right at the front of the magazine. We're getting a glimpse of what's inside this issue. Looks like they're already talking about the GameCube, which is exciting, with titles like SSX Tricky, Madden 2002, and Rogue Leader being teased. Right then, we've got the usual Club 64 mailbox for reader letters, a how-to section for Majora's Mask, still going strong that one, and tips extra for general gaming advice. Game On and I'm the Best Sound Like Reader Challenge sections. Skill Club Millennium 2001 and Dr. Kit's Game Clinic are regular features, and there's a directory for N64 game ratings. Of course, there's always the subs page to get you hooked in. Interestingly, they're previewing Mario Kart Super Circuit already, even though it's a Game Boy Advance game. Fair enough, I suppose. And a piece on what went wrong at Retro Studios. Or must be about the Metroid Prime development, bet that's a juicy one. Finally, a chance to win a GameCube. Who wouldn't want one of those? Seems like a packed issue. This page right then is a look at what's coming up in the world of N64 and GameCube games. We've got the big future look splashed across the page because, well, it's about the future. In it, there's Mario, or someone dressed as him, in a futuristic spaceship contraption, classic N64 Magazine cover style that, down the side, they're teasing what's inside this month's issue. Looks like they're having a first look at SSX Tricky for the GameCube, reckon it's all about snowboard stuntery from EA, page 6 apparently. Then there's Madden 2002, promising gorgeous shots of American footy, which is page 8. And lastly, Star Wars, Rogue Leader, they're saying it's a reason to get a GameCube, page 10. Opaitaya. Over on the right it's all about SSX Tricky, SSXT Coldplay, they've called it, which is a bit clever I suppose. Big picture of some lads snowboarding, one with a proper orange afro hat, or is it an afro? The magazine is even questioning it. Apparently, this Eddie Wachowski character, known as the Kid, is new to SSX. He's supposed to be about 34 years old, which is ancient in game character years. There's an info burst section, typical magazine table layout with the GameCube logo. SSX Tricky is from EA, 1 disc, 1 or 2 players, Rumble function is yes, GBA link up and online play are both no. Release date wise, it's December in the US, TBA, for us Brits and Japan. They're giving it 3 out of 5 red blobs for anticipation, so not exactly groundbreaking excitement it seems. Below the big picture, there's a little screenshot of the game, and they're already having a pop at the graphics, saying, let's hope EA's programmers can do something about those dodgy looking trees. Bit harsh maybe, but you know what magazines were like back then, always finding something to moan about. Oh, and at the bottom left it says, want more new games? Check out the coming soon section of Planet 64 on page 20. Standard magazine plug for more content. Issue 59 of N64 Magazine, don't you know? This page is all about SSX. Tricky Blimey, remember that one? They're saying it was originally meant to be like a director's cut of the first SSX on the PlayStation 2, but it's become a proper sequel. Seems they think it's a good mix of 1080 snowboarding and Tony Hawk's, all about doing stunts and tricks down massive mountainsides. They're banging on about the controls, using the L, R and Z buttons for mad stunts like ollieing, kick-flipping and Christ-airing. Bit much Christ-airing, isn't it? Apparently doing tricks gets you points, which gets you speed. Standard stuff really. The tracks are tweaked versions of the original SSX courses, with ramps and bumps everywhere, to help you find the racing line. Not just snow either, they're going on about rope bridges and underwater tunnels. Underwater tunnels in the snow? Righto. Tadek. They reckon the graphics are good, calling it lens flare effect, and someone's coming up the mountain, bless them. More about timing your button presses, or you'll fall off the cliff. Groundbreaking stuff. Towards the bottom they're saying the GameCube version might not be top priority for EA. Early versions are missing 4-player mode, which is a bit of a downer, and they're worried about wasted disk space on MTV footage of the characters. They reckon there are 4 months until the December release in the States, so hopefully, they'll sort it out. They'll be keeping an eye on it apparently, and promise more shots in the next issue. To be continued. Warily. Dramatic. October 2001, yeah, takes me back. This page is a preview for Madden 2002 on the GameCube, back when the Cube was the new console on the block. EA Sports are pushing their football game, highlighting what they're calling first-class visuals. There are a few screenshots showing some American football action. The reviewer seems quite impressed, going on about the graphics being so detailed you can see young man's packed lunch. A bit much, perhaps? They're also highlighting the violence and how realistic the tackles are. Oof! That's gotta hurt. Right. Apparently you can even spot a Darth Vader in the crowd. Someone was clearly having a laugh at EA's expense. They're raving about the stitches on the ball, saying it demonstrates the GameCube's graphical power, and Xbox hasn't got a hope. A bold claim, even back then. The info burst gives you the basic details. 1 disc, 1 to 4 players, Rumble, GBA link-up, no online play, out in November 2002 in the US and UK, and TBA for Japan. They've given it a strong anticipation rating, 4 out of 5 orbs. This page is all about Madden 2002 on the GameCube. It's a future look, so we're getting a sneak peek at what's coming. Big bold letters 2002 are slapped right in the middle, can't miss that. They are banging on about the visuals, naturally saying the game's gonna look amazing on the GameCube. Apparently the jerseys will tear, helmets will scratch, and even blood will flow. Bit much maybe, but alright. They're making a big deal about the detail, saying it's near infinite, and that it'll make the football stars look brilliant. They're even saying the crowds will be realistic, and there's commentary from John Madden himself, naturally, hours of it apparently. And get this, you can link it up to your Game Boy Advance to select plays, fancy that. It's all sounding very impressive for the time, innit? Hey boa! There are screenshots dotted around, showing off the in-game action. One of them even highlights the realistic faces. Apparently even the bloke in the picture's mustache is top-notch, according to them. Right then, they are also saying it's out in time for the GameCube launch in both the US and the UK, and they'll have more on it soon. October 2001 issue this is then. This page is all about Star Wars Rogue Leader, or Rogue Squadron 2 as it was properly known, for the new GameCube. Blimey, look at those screenshots. Factor 5 were always pushing the boat out, and this was no exception, eh? They're banging on about how amazing the ground troop detail is, and how the GameCube handles everything like a dream. You've got shots of what looks like Hoth with AT-ATs and snowspeeders, and then a city level, maybe Bespin? The text is pretty hyped. Look at it, look at it, look at it! Bit much, but I get the excitement. It did look pretty tidy back then, especially compared to what we were used to on the N64. Joss. The info burst box gives you the basics: GameCube, LucasArts, 1 disc, single player, Rumble. Yeah, of course, Rumble was all the rage then. GBA, link-up, and online play, both no. Which was standard for consoles at the time, really. Release dates are down as November for the US, spring for the UK, and TBA for Japan. Anticipation rating is full marks, 5 red dots. They were really pushing this one. They're even saying the Bespin cities will look even better when properly texture mapped, so they're clearly still work in progress shots. Enemy gun turrets being a pain for AW-ings, that sounds about right for a Star Wars shooter. Good times. This page is a future look at Star Wars Rogue Leader on the N64. Blimey, this was one to get excited about back then, wasn't it? It's talking about how visually stunning it was for the GameCube, and how they couldn't believe it could look any better. They've got some screenshots of X-Wings over Hoth, AT-ATs, and even a Star Destroyer in space. They are banging on about the draw distance, saying you can see battles in the distance, and how clear the view is. They mention the Hoth level specifically, saying it's just like the source material, which is always good to hear when it's Star Wars. Apparently, even the ground troops are detailed, with face masks and utility belts, fancy stuff for the N64 era, eh? They are saying you can command ground troops with the D-pad, which adds some depth to the gameplay, making it more than just a prettier version of Rogue Squadron. Good job, because Rogue Squadron was already pretty decent on the 64. They seem genuinely impressed with this one, reckon it's going to be something special. And they're promising more coverage in the future, so yeah, this was definitely a game N64 owners were keeping an eye on. This page is all about Nintendo getting ready to unleash the GameCube at Space World. It's building up to this big event where they're promising to show off Mario and Zelda for their new console. They're having a press conference just before Space World itself, saying it's going to be packed with announcements. Sounds like they're really trying to make a splash. And why wouldn't they? Everyone's been waiting to see what Nintendo's got up their sleeve for the next generation after the N64. The article talks about how Space World is the first chance for the Japanese public to get their hands on the GameCube and its games. They reckon Nintendo is desperate to grab everyone's attention in the run-up to the GameCube launch. Apparently they're going to be revealing worldwide launch dates, prices and all that good stuff. Plus, they're making a big deal about the GameCube GBA link, which was supposed to be a proper game changer at the time, connecting the handheld to the big console. They mentioned Shigeru Miyamoto is going to show off a near-finished version of the Mario 64 sequel, which would become Super Mario Sunshine, of course. And they're expecting a Zelda game in the style of Ocarina of Time to make an appearance too, which was definitely what everyone wanted to hear back then. They even hint at some games that were leaked online: Mario Sunshine, 100 Marios, Marionette, and Perfect Dark Zero. Someone at Nintendo must have been having a bad day when those titles got out early. Warriors. There are a couple of pictures on the page. One shows a massive queue for Space World 2000, showing how popular it was. The other is of a purple GameCube, looking all sleek and futuristic back then. The article does say that the initial lineup of playable GameCube games at Space World might be a bit thin, mentioning only FIFA 2002 and Rune. Not exactly system sellers on their own, are they? But they quote Nintendo's Satoru Iwata, saying that third-party developers are holding back their announcements for Space World, so they're not too worried about a lack of big games. Fingers crossed, eh? Overall, it's classic Nintendo hype for their new console, playing it up big time. This page is all about the upcoming GameCube, and there are a few bits and bobs of news dotted about too. First up, there's a snippet saying computer company NEC are using Mario in their adverts, because apparently Luigi's Mansion was made on their super-powered computers. Bit cheeky that. Then there's news of Peter Main retiring from Nintendo of America. Apparently he was a big cheese there, and helped get the GameCube ready to launch. Good luck to him. UE. The main focus of the page is the GameCube controller. It's called GC Joypad, the final design, and it's an exclusive. Apparently Nintendo was still fiddling about with the design even after showing it off previously. They reckon it's now smaller and a bit more rubbery, which sounds alright. They've pointed out a few changes like a bump on the Z button and a wider C-stick. And it's got the GC logo embossed on the back. Natty. There's a bloke holding it, looking rather pleased with himself. What? Down below there's a bit about Space World, which was the big game show back then. Apparently, Japan's big developers like Konami, Namco and Capcom are finally throwing their weight behind Nintendo for the GameCube. Capcom are supposed to be showing off Resident Evil 0, which was a GameCube exclusive prequel to the original Resident Evil, can you believe? Namco might have Soul Calibur or Tekken Tag Tournament ready. Or maybe both. They're also mentioning Super Smash Bros. Melee and Ridge Racer V as possibilities from Namco. Konami are expected to show off new Power Pro Baseball and Superstar Soccer games, and even Jurassic Park and ZOE for Game Boy Advance. Busy times ahead. There's also a little screenshot of Rune, saying it's a playable Space World game. Looks a bit brown. This page delves into the world of Star Wars games coming to the GameCube. Blimey, looks like they are really pushing the system. Apparently GameCube is going to be the place to be for Star Wars fans, especially with Rogue Leader, looking rather amazing from these hot-off-the-press screenshots. They mention LucasArts are promising even more games based on the upcoming Episode 2 film, Attack of the Clones. Simon Jeffrey from LucasArts is quoted saying they'll have pretty exciting Episode 2 product, although he's being cagey about who's developing them and what type of games they will be. Rumors are swirling that Factor 5, the chaps behind Rogue Leader, might be doing another Star Wars game, perhaps even turning their third-person shooter game Tornado into a Star Wars title. It makes sense, given Rogue Leader's stunning looks. There's also a little snippet about EA and FIFA. Seems EA Europe told N64 Magazine they aren't planning to release FIFA 2002 on GameCube in Europe. Bit of a baffling decision, that, considering they were banging on about how excited they were about the GameCube just after E3. They reckon it's down to some bizarre decision about GameCube FIFA being Road to the World Cup. Right then, next up it mentions Matsushita, the company behind the GameCube DVD player, are releasing it in Japan for around 40,000 yen, which is about £225. Originally, they were planning a higher price. Still, that's a fair bit of cash for a DVD player add-on for a games console, innit? Orinchin. Finally, there's a now showing Kyujin section. Apparently Japanese cinemagoers are getting a sneak peek at Smash Bros. Melee before Pokemon films. It's described as a short preview with Mario, Fox, Peach and the gang scrapping it out. They reckon this will help get the young'uns interested in Nintendo's army. Marketing, eh? They do love a good cross-promotion. This page has got a good bit going on right then. First up, there's a piece about Doom coming to the Game Boy Advance, can you believe it? Doom on a handheld. They're saying it's just like the PC version, which is mad. I remember back then, the thought of having proper Doom on the go was pretty exciting, even if it was on that tiny GBA screen. Apparently you can even link up for multiplayer deathmatches, which is a laugh, blowing demons to bits with your mates on the train. Then there's some Sega gossip, with Peter Moore talking about the rumors of a Sega and Nintendo RPG. Sounds like typical industry chat, you know, everyone wants to know if Sonic and Mario are going to team up for a game. He's playing it down a bit, saying it's just wishful thinking. But back then you always held out hope for something mental like that. Mel there. Nintendo's lawyers are at it again. They're suing someone called Ternanog and Enterbrain over a PlayStation game, Tear Ring Saga, because apparently it copies Fire Emblem. They've nicked backgrounds and characters apparently. Nintendo always were protective of their stuff. And blimey, Tekken is heading to the Game Boy Advance as well. Tiny Tekken they're calling it. Namco, who did Soul Calibur on the Dreamcast, are on it. Everyone was buzzing about Tekken, and the idea of having it on a handheld was something else. Oh, and a bit of sad news for some. Retro Studios, the guys making Metroid Prime, have canned their GameCube RPG Ravenblade. Apparently it's so they can really focus on Metroid Prime. Well, looking back, it was definitely the right call, wasn't it? Metroid Prime was a system seller. Lastly, there's an ad for the N64 Magazine Tips helpline. Pay by the minute to get help with your N64 games. Cheeky. They list a load of games they can help with, like Conker's Bad Fur Day, Battle for Naboo, Kirby 64, Excitebike 64, the Zelda games like Majora's Mask and Ocarina of Time, Perfect Dark, Mario Party 2, Donkey Kong 64, and Pokemon Stadium. Everything you needed help with back then, pretty much. Madness paying for it though when we had mates and the internet was kicking off. This page is from the Retro World section, right, taking a look back at some old classics. First up, They're on about Wolfenstein 3D. Bit of a history lesson for the young'uns, saying some people think it was the first-person shooter, but it wasn't really. Apparently there were games like Catacomb Abyss kicking about before it, which were from the same lot, A-Lead Software. They mention Wolfenstein paved the way for Doom, which is fair enough, and that playing it now shows you how basic shooters used to be, no jumping or looking up and down really. They even point out the lifts in the game are just for finishing levels, not proper lifts like we expect these days. Then they move on to Street Fighter, the original arcade game. They say it came out in '87, and reckon it was a bit pants compared to Street Fighter 2, which everyone went mad for a few years later. They make a point that Street Fighter wasn't the first one-on-one fighter, naming Karate Champ and Yi Kung Fu as being earlier, which is true. But they do say Street Fighter was still important, because it introduced Ryu and Ken, and had these fancy pressure-sensitive buttons which meant you could hit harder. They also mention some characters from the original, Birdie, Aladon and Jen, are going to be in Street Fighter Alpha 3 on the Game Boy Advance later that year. Sneaky way to plug the GBA, eh? There's also a little side bit about Game Boy Advance sales, saying it's selling really well, and another one saying Activision are making loads of games for the GameCube, so they must think it'll do alright. Pictures-wise, you've got some screenshots from Wolfenstein and Street Fighter, and then a load of pictures of old controllers, SNES pad, N64 One, that sort of thing, plus some bloke on a skateboard. Standard magazine filler, really. This page is the front cover of N64 Magazine, issue 59. Right there at the top it's screaming, "Win! Your chance to bag a GameCube now!" Very exciting for the time. The GameCube was just around the corner then. The main title is huge, N64 feet of course, with those colourful balls they always used, and a big stylized number 1. The main image features a character, looks like Rihanna from Galleon, holding a couple of swords. Galleon is getting a 6-page preview, which is pretty generous for a magazine cover. Down the side it mentions, another N64 exclusive, SSX Tricky. SSX Tricky was a big deal back then, the snowboarding game everyone was raving about. It says first ever pick, see page 6, so they were really pushing that exclusive angle. Underneath that it says plus, we overload on Turok Evolution, and lists other games like Star Fox Adventures, Smash Bros, Wave Race Blue Storm, Animal Leader, Animal Forest Plus. Sounds like they're cramming a lot in. Over on the other side under Galleon it shouts, GameCube World First. Bit dramatic, but fair enough if they had the scoop. Then there's first review, Mario Kart on GBA. Again, Game Boy Advance was the hot handheld at the time, so Mario Kart on it would have been huge news. They boast, we road test Nintendo's stunning handheld racer. Then at the bottom left, there's a box saying plus, Planet Game Boy Super Street Fighter 2.0. Looks like they're covering the Super Street Fighter 2 port for the Game Boy Advance, saying SNES Magic on your GB Advance. They were really pushing the GBA stuff this issue. Machu. Bottom right corner has the price £3.30, October 2001, and issue number 59. Website address for gamesradar.com is there too, for those early internet days. Overall looks like a packed issue, focusing on upcoming N64 and Game Boy Advance titles, and really playing up the GameCube hype with that competition. Standard N64 magazine fare, for the time, really. This page is the front of the magazine and it's announcing the release date, 24th of September 2001, for the upcoming issue. It's shouting about what's inside next month, with a load of little boxes showcasing different bits and pieces. Looks like they've got a 15, Nintendo something or other, probably a review score. There's a mention of Blastendo, sounds a bit generic doesn't it? Then, Lookendo G, possibly a GoldenEye thing. Visions of Ski Missable, is definitely about a skiing game, maybe a review. Review N64 is clearly a review section, saying they get games before anyone else, which is a bit of a boast, isn't it? Play TV section is mentioned, something about a redesigned revamp club, bit vague. Gaming section talks about the re-something, can't quite make it out. Fate More section is there. New Look section says they've listened to you righto. Exclusive gives, sounds like freebies, always good. And News Desk, for all the latest info on new games obviously. So yeah, it's your typical magazine cover hyping up what's inside to get you to buy it next month. October 2001 issue, number 19. Pretty standard stuff. This page is all about Turok Evolution, the latest in the Turok series. It's previewed as putting big game hunting back on the menu. There's a Q&A section at the top. Someone is asking about Joshua Fireseed being dead after Turok 3, Shadow of Oblivion, and the magazine confirms that Evolution is actually a prequel, set before the original Turok, Dinosaur Hunter. Bit of a retcon, but hey, that's games for you. Warrington Null. There are some screenshots dotted about, looking like your typical Turok fare. Jungle settings, dinosaurs, and a chap who I presume is Turok himself, looking a bit grumpy. One of the captions is even joking about his expression being straight out of the John Voight School of Method Acting. Cheeky. Another caption mentions pterodactyls, saying, "Told you pterodactyls ahoy." Lovely stuff. They are promising underwater beasties as well, which sounds a bit different. Down the side, there's an info burst for the GameCube version. It's from Acclaim, just one disc, 14 players, rumble function is in but no GBA link-up or online play, which is standard for consoles back then really. Release dates are TBA across the board. The anticipation rating is pretty high, 4 out of 5 blobs, so they're clearly looking forward to it. In the main article, they're talking about seeing it at E3 and being excited. They were wobbling about with excitement apparently. They mentioned Turok 3 made them weep, which might be a bit strong, but Shadow of Oblivion wasn't exactly the best Turok game, was it? They're saying this one will restore the series to its former glory, bringing back the jungle settings and gun-toting dinosaurs like the first 2 Turok games on the N64. They even admit the screenshots are from a video over a year old, and the game has improved tenfold since then. Bit of a claim, but let's see if it lives up to the hype when it actually comes out. The next page is all about Super Smash Bros. Melee, and blimey, were we hyped for this back then? They're calling it a Nintendo punch-up par excellence. Bit flowery language in it. But yeah, we were gagging for any scraps of info at this point. Screenshots trickling out of Nintendo HQ. Agony. Pure agony. They're going on about how much we want it, and they're showing off some screenshots. Apparently Princess Peach can float, bit like she did in Super Mario Advance. And the ice climbers are still stuck together, connected by an elastic band. Their words. There's talk about the Super Scope 6 from the SNES, and it's in the game as a collectible item, but apparently, the battery life is rubbish even in the game, only lasts a few seconds. Hilarious. Hilarious. There's a Q&A section. First question is about Bowser, saying he's in and he's a strong but slow fighter, can breathe fire and spin around, and he's got a move where he just falls on top of you to crush you. Charming. Then there's a question about new items, and they mention the pink parasol that lets you float and can be used to poke people in the face, and the health items have changed from melons to proper dinners, cups of tea and roast dinners, scanned from actual photos. Bizarre. Then they touch on the lightsaber, saying Nintendo changed the shape and sound, so George Lucas's lawyer mates don't pay them a visit. Clever move. Apparently it's still the best weapon though, even with a new dodge move. The info burst box at the bottom gives the game details. It's for the GameCube. Made by Nintendo, just one disc, 14 players, rumble is in, no GBA link-up, and no online play. Well, it was 2001, wasn't it? Release dates are TBA for the US and UK, and November for Japan. Anticipation rating is 5 orange circles. Full hype. October 2001 at the bottom of the page. Times were simpler then, weren't they? This page is all about Wave Race, Blue Storm for the GameCube, looks pretty swish. There's a Q&A section at the start where they're chatting about Kawasaki sponsoring the game again, even if they can't call them jet skis, because of trademarks. Bit of a kerfuffle that. And they're wondering if the riders from the original Wave Race 64 are back. Apparently Dave Mariner is making a return, though they're taking the mickey out of his comedy Froguy's helmet being gone, haha. Then there's a big write-up about the game itself. Sounds like Nintendo's not been showing much of it until recently. Claude Comer, the main bloke on the game, has been spilling the beans. Apparently they've gone deep into the water physics to make it super realistic, from how the riders bounce to the waves changing with the weather. They're even banging on about custom courses, which sounds interesting if it works well. Visually, it looks like a step up from the N64 game, as you'd expect on the Cube. They're showing off some screenshots, including one of Drake Lake from the original game but looking much prettier, and another of a snowy level. Seems a bit mad but could be fun. Orange. There's a little info box that says it's coming from Nintendo, one disc, 1 to 4 players, rumble function, no GBA link-up, or online play, which is standard for the time. It's out in Japan in September, and November for us here in the UK. Typical. They've given it a full 5 out of 5 anticipation rating, which is fair enough. Wave Race was always a solid racer back on the N64. Oh, and apparently Claude Comer promises you can see underwater if you mess up a jump. A bit of a gimmick perhaps, but why not? And finally they mention seeing a nighttime track in Famitsu Mag, and it's supposed to be playable at Space World. Sounds like they're throwing everything at this one. This page is all about Animal Forest Plus. Crikey, Animal Forest, now that was a weird one back on the N64, wasn't it? Only came out in Japan originally, and trying to play it with all that Japanese text was a right pain. Even though the reviewer back then in issue 56 said it was still good fun. But bless 'em, Nintendo are bringing it out on the GameCube as Animal Forest Plus, and translating it into English finally. It's all about chatting to animals apparently, and making mates with them. You get a house, and you fill it with stuff you collect, like chairs and tables, and even a bog standard telly. Mad in it? Haughty. They've got a Q&A section here. Apparently you really do own a house, which is your base. You can collect NES games in it too, like Donkey Kong and Balloon Fight, which is a bit of alright. And get this, it's got a real-time system, so if you play on Christmas Day, it's Christmas in the game. What's the point of it all then? Well, certain characters only turn up at certain times, and give you special stuff. And as time goes on, new houses pop up with new neighbors, maybe even enemies they reckon. Down the side there's an info burst bit. It confirms it's on GameCube, comes on one disc, is one player, has Rumble, but no GBA link-up or online play. When's it out? Well, Japan's TBA, and UK is TBA, but December is mentioned. Looks like they're pretty hyped for it, giving it 5 out of 5 anticipation ratings. Looks alright I suppose, a bit odd, but could be a laugh. This page delves into Super Monkey Ball for the GameCube. Blimey, what a surprise. It's a Q&A section and a bit of a preview. Etc. First up, someone's asking about levels. Apparently, there are 100 single-player maps across themes like tropical, space, sky, and mountains. They reckon there will be GameCube-specific levels too. Multiplayer mode sounds a bit of alright, with races and banana collecting challenges across different arenas, even with 4 monkeys rolling around. They even mentioned Dole, the banana company, sponsoring the game, so every completed level gets a Dole sticker. Crazy! And the monkeys have names: Ai, Mimi, and Baby. Sega is keeping shatum about secret characters though. The main bit is about the gameplay, rolling, rolling, rolling. It's described as a simple concept, tilting the world to guide your monkey ball. They reckon it's like those infuriating pocket puzzles, but Sega got there first. Graphically, they mention the arenas are stunning, set in places like dusky evening skies and crumbling coliseums. You tilt the map with the analog stick, aiming to get your simian to the level exit and grab bananas along the way. They say it's easy to pick up and play, but might be a top game to get into. They are comparing it to Luigi's Mansion and Wave Race, Blue Storm, which are also launching on GameCube. There's an info burst box giving game details. It's from Sega, 1 disc, 14 players, Rumble function yes, GBA link up no, online play no. Release date for Japan is the 14th of September, but TBA for the UK and US. Anticipation rating is 4 out of 5 red blobs, so they are pretty keen. This page covers a couple of upcoming GameCube titles. First up is Animal Leader, and blimey, it's a bit of an odd one. They're calling it Beastly Behavior, which is a bit much. It looks rather simple graphically, even for a GameCube game, still blocky like the old N64 days. Apparently you're a little pig-like thing, and you eat smaller creatures and avoid bigger ones to evolve into a top carnivore. Sounds a bit bonkers but intriguing in a strange way. The Q&A section is quite amusing. They're trying to explain the rather basic premise of wandering around and eating things, and there's a bit about your pig possibly evolving wheels if you mistreat it, which is just daft. They reckon there are about 50 animals in total. Some cute, some grotesque. The info burst box mentions it's from Nintendo, it's 1 disc, single-player Rumble function, but no GBA link-up or online play. The release is TBA for both the UK and Japan. They are saying it might be too bizarre for Western audiences, but they'll have more info next issue. Below that is Universal Studios, which looks a bit more standard fare. It's described as a whole world of movie-based fun, a virtual trip around a theme park with Woody Woodpecker as your guide. Kemco are doing this one, and it sounds like a collection of mini-games based on Universal Studios Hollywood rides, like Jurassic Park and Back to the Future. They reckon it's not going to win any awards, but might be a bit of fun. Graphically they say it looks nice, with proper polygonal characters on pre-rendered backgrounds, comparing it to the Temple of Time in Zelda, Ocarina of Time, which is a fair shout actually. Apparently some thought it might be a build-your-own theme park game. But it's not. Kemco denied it, and it seems like we'll have to wait for a proper theme park world on the GameCube. They're hoping it will be out in time for the GameCube UK launch, depending on the US version's success, but they reckon it's likely as it won't need much translation. Again, the info burst says Kemco are the publishers, single disc, single player, Rumble function, no GBA link-up or online play, and a November release in the US, again TBA for the UK and Japan. This page is the front cover of a Game Boy magazine, or at least it looks like one of those offshoot mags from back in the day. This one's Game Boy Planet, presented by N64 Planet. Bit confusing, but hey, it was the early 2000s. Warrington new. Big focus here is Mario Kart Advance, splashed across the whole page in massive yellow letters. First UK review, it shouts, and they're calling it a road test of Nintendo's smash hit on GBA. They were definitely laying it on thick, weren't they? 6-page review apparently starting on page 32. Top left corner they've got reviewed this issue. Spider-Man on page 43, saying Spidey's swinging onto GBA in another cracking platform adventure. Then Street Fighter 2, on page 42, reckon Capcom's beautiful GB Advance beat-em-up smacks us hard in the peepers. Smacks us hard in the peepers. Bit much, even for back then. Screenshot of Guile and Bison duking it out. Warrensu. Orange circle screams win! 3 copies of Mario Kart up for grabs. Always those competitions, weren't there? PLS section promises news of Nintendo and Rare's Space World titles, which was always exciting to see what they were cooking up at Space World. Previews of the year's forthcoming stunners. Typical hype for games coming soon. First review of the awesome FPS Backtrack FPS on the Game Boy Advance. Intriguing, I guess. And lastly, Professor Oak's advice, GB tips, your muties and more. Professor Oak giving advice? Bit random. Muties? Probably talking about us gamers. Genamoos. Issue 34, October 2001. It says down in the corner, next to a picture of a see-through purple Game Boy Pocket. Takes you back, doesn't it? This page is all about the Game Boy Advance, proper exciting stuff back then. It's titled Countdown to Space World, which was Nintendo's big show. They're welcoming us to Planet Game Boy, and talking about how mental it is that we can now play Mario Kart and Street Fighter, proper SNES classics, on a handheld. They even joke about how if you told someone 10 years prior they'd laugh in your face. They're previewing what Nintendo is going to show at Space World in Tokyo. Top of the list is Super Mario Advance 2, which they say is basically Super Mario World from the SNES but on the Game Boy Advance. Sounds amazing, who wouldn't want Super Mario World in your pocket? They reckon Nintendo are giving it a proper overhaul too, not just a straight port. Then there's talk about other games, including a few role-playing games mentioning Lunar Blade, Fire Emblem and Camelot's Golden Sun. Loads of RPGs coming to the GBA it seems. Rare, who were always good back in the day, are bringing out Banjo-Kazooie, Grunty's Revenge for the GBA, and digging into their old catalogue too, with Sabre Wolf, another retro classic. There's also a bit about Sega games like Columns and Puyo Puyo, and even Sonic coming to the GBA. They're teasing some Hanson previews later. Down at the bottom there's a C-top press section about a car that you can control with the Game Boy Advance, made by BAM Entertainment for their Game Driven. Bit of a gimmick really, but sounded cool at the time I suppose. And a quick mention of something new for the Game Boy camera, which was a weird but fun little add-on. Overall, it's all looking pretty good for the Game Boy Advance in the coming months they reckon. This page of Planet Game Boy news kicks off with talk about the Bitmap Brothers, and some of their old games heading to the Game Boy Advance. They're starting with Speedball 2, Brutal Deluxe, which was a proper classic back in the day on the Mega Drive, a right bit of futuristic sports violence. They also mention the Chaos Engine, one of their top-down shooters, saying it will be a co-op blast, which is always good fun with your mates on the link cable. Apparently, they might bring over other titles from their back catalogue too, like Xenon 2 and Gods. Always good to see some proper retro stuff getting a new lease of life. Then there's news about King of Fighters making its way to the GBA. SNK were always knocking out decent 2D fighters, weren't they? King of Fighters was their big series, popular in the arcades and on the Neo Geo of course. 16 characters are promised, and link-up play for a scrap with your mates. They compare it to Street Fighter 2, which is the benchmark for fighters really. Lastly, they're previewing Planet Monsters from Titus. Sounds a bit like Pengo, doesn't it? Pushing blocks to squash monsters. Bubblegum guns are mentioned as power-ups, which sounds a bit random. 4-player mode is in this one as well. Seems to be a theme on the GBA. Graphics are apparently a bit like Bomberman. Coming out in the US first, then over here later. Looks alright for a bit of puzzle action. This page is looking at previews for the Game Boy Advance, and it's all about cartoons and superheroes it seems. First up we've got Toonami, featuring Dexter's Laboratory and Powerpuff Girls. Dexter's game sounds like a bit of a puzzle affair, wandering around his lab fixing things, which, knowing Dexter, is probably a recipe for disaster. The Powerpuff Girls game is more of a side-scrolling shooter, where you get to control all 3 of them, switching between them with the shoulder buttons apparently. They reckon it's a step up from the Powerpuff Girls game on the old Game Boy Color, which, let's be honest, wasn't setting the world on fire. Then we have X-Men, Reign of Apocalypse. Right, so another Marvel game on the way for the GBA. This one's a side-scrolling beat-em-up, taken after the classic SNES X-Men arcade game from Konami back in '92. They mention you can play as Wolverine, Rogue, Gambit, and others, using fists and mutant powers to wallop waves of bad guys. Looks like it can get quite busy on screen with enemies and effects, which is always good in a brawler. They saw an early version at E3, and were impressed, saying it's got over 40 characters from the comics and different game modes, including a versus mode. Sounds like a promising package for the GBA. This page is all about previews for the Game Boy Advance. Seems like they're calling this section Planet Game Boy. Kicking things off is Wario Land 4, and blimey, they're laying it on thick with the description of Wario as unfathomably evil. They're saying it's proper platforming, better than Mario Advance apparently, and that this Wario Land's a character is back. Apparently, even though he's invincible, you get to see him getting squashed and electrocuted, all in the name of finding loot. It's set in pyramids, and visually it's supposed to be a step up, even reminding them of Yoshi's Island on the SNES, which is high praise indeed. They're banging on about how polished it looks, with spinning backgrounds and detailed animations. Sounds like they're enjoying seeing Wario get a right old kicking. They're expecting it for November time. Kikis. Next up, there's RoboCop. They're keen to point out this isn't like the top-down Game Boy Color RoboCop they slated before. This one's a side-scroller for the GBA, thankfully. They mention the old Spectrum RoboCop game, and how this GBA version is much more colorful. It's all about shooting bad guys, and they mention ED-209 will be making an appearance. Looks like you can shoot upwards too, handy that. Again slated for November. Kali. Lastly, it's European Super League, a football game from Virgin Interactive. They reckon it's the first proper football game on the GBA, and expect loads more to follow. Apparently, it's got real teams and players from 16 European teams. You can play top-down or a fancier isometric view. They're wondering if it can match the quality of football games on the SNES and seem hopeful. Sounds like they're keen to see if it can handle all the fancy footwork. Intriguing stuff. This page is a review for Mario Kart Super Circuit on the Game Boy Advance. Proper handheld stuff, eh? Right at the top it's got a Your Ultimate Buying Guide star rating system, which is a bit naff, but alright. They've given it 4 out of 5 stars, saying it's well worth a look. This is an excellent title. Not bad. Big picture of Wario driving his kart taking up most of the page, bit scary looking if you ask me. Underneath that it says GBA review, and it was out on the 14th of September, price was £35. A bit steep for a handheld game back then, but Mario Kart, you know how it is. Players 1 to 4 with link up. Nice. Tember. The review text is all about how this is the Mario Kart we were waiting for since the SNES 1. Reckons it captured the hearts of most gamers, and this one is immensely playable and utterly addictive. Bit strong words, but it was good, I suppose. They're saying it's been 10 years since the SNES version, making us all feel old already. Cheers for that. Lubble. They mention the graphics are sprite-based, like the N64 versions, and backgrounds are fantastic, even pointing out a weird Yoshi Sphinx thing. Freaky, they call it. There are a few screenshots showing different tracks, desert, ice, you know the drill with Mario Kart. One screenshot points out Yoshi's good handling on ice, another warns about missing a jump. Another mentions track surfaces making a difference. Standard Mario Kart stuff really, but good to have it on the go, wasn't it? This page is a review for Mario Kart Super Circuit. Blimey, another Mario Kart already. It's for the Game Boy Advance, so a handheld version, fair enough. The title is Out with the New, In with the Old, which is a bit of a giveaway really. Right, so visuals says it's a mix of the old SNES Mario Kart and the N64 one. Apparently it looks like the SNES game, but the characters and karts are more like the N64 version. They reckon it's a decent design job for the Game Boy Advance. And also has a handling-wise, it's apparently similar to the SNES game, but they've brought in the character classes from the N64 version. It mentions drifting is a bit more pronounced, and it feels like you're moving the kart and not the track around you, which is a SNES thing apparently. Weapons. Well, they are saying it's the usual suspects: shells, bananas, lightning, stars, mushrooms, you know the drill. They've chucked in the triple shells from the N64 game, and you can lay red shells as mines now. Cheeky. Tracks are described as SNES style. Not too long or annoying apparently, which is good because some of those later Mario Kart's tracks could drag on a bit. They say the surface grip is different to the N64 game, and you can even race on updated SNES tracks again, which they seem to like, calling it very tasty. There are a bunch of screenshots dotted around, showing the game in action. One of them points out that Wario's acceleration is rubbish, but he's fast at top speed. Typical Wario. Another one mentions the ghost tracks are still as squeaky as ever, which is a very specific detail, isn't it? And another one talks about Bowser's tracks being full of thwomps, lava and sand traps. Sounds like fun if you like that sort of thing. Oh, and there's a bit saying a well-placed shell should see someone called Matza take the lead, whoever Matza is. Talsa, Cheshire. Right at the bottom it says October 2001, and Game Boy, so yeah, that's when this was out. Another Mario Kart to get your teeth into on the go. This page is taking a look at the track designs in Mario Kart 64, giving us a track teaser, it's calling it. Right then, Mushroom Cup first. They're saying it's a gentle intro, which is fair enough. First up is Peach's Castle Garden. Nice and simple. Drive around, bit of scenery, pretty flowers, trees, nothing to trouble you really. Then it's Koopa Troopa Beach. Bit of a nod to the old SNES game there. In it, sandy course, water on the sides, crabs and cannons. That'll keep you on your toes. Next in the Mushroom Cup is a jungle track. Bit more to it. Dirt track, less grip, corners to slide around, jumps, speed boosts, and water traps. And to finish off the Mushroom Cup, it's Bowser's Lair. Back to Bowser already, eh? They're saying nastiness is expected, lava, thwomps, sand traps, all the usual Bowser tricks to mess you about, Noltha? Right, Flower Cup next. Getting a bit trickier, they reckon. First track, they are calling it another standard racing course. Power-ups, power sliding, you should be getting the hang of it by now, they're saying. Then it's Ghost Valley, squeaky floorboards, boosts, sounds like a laugh. They're bigging it up as a favourite. Shortcuts, boosts, jumps, gaps in the track, sounds like a right bit of chaos. Boosts. Next in the Flower Cup is Cheeseland. Cheese track, eh? Made of cheese apparently. Winding track, blue mice running about. They're mentioning poor grip and hairpins. Sounds a bit slippy and slidey. And finally for the Flower Cup, it's Bowser's Castle Circuit again. Right-angled turns, forks in the road, lava pits, plenty going on they say. Pits, jumps, gaps, all to ram your opponents, nasty. So yeah, that's the Mushroom and Flower Cups. Gives you a flavour of what to expect in Mario Kart 64. Good bit of karting fun that was. This page is all about the Thunder Cup and Star Cup in Mario Kart 64, giving us a little preview of these new tracks. Looking back, Mario Kart 64 was proper ace, wasn't it? Still holds up, mind you. Buwari Guwar. For the Thunder Cup, they're saying the first track, Sherbet Land, is a nightmare on the harder classes with puddles and rain. Sounds about right, remember getting spun out on that ice all the time. Royal Raceway is up next, described as dreamy with a beanstalk thing going on. I guess they mean the big jump over Peach's castle, yeah, it was a bit of a spectacle. Then there's Wario Stadium, a dusty desert circuit with shy guys and mud traps. Always a bit of a pain, that one. And finally Bowser's Castle, which they call Dusty Desert, bit odd as it's usually lava and traps, but okay. They mention speed-sapping mud, perhaps this is a different Bowser's Castle than I recall. Still, sounds like the usual challenging Mario Kart fare. Moving on to the Star Cup, the first track is Mario Raceway, apparently icy and slippy. Coins are scarce, so getting bumped around is bad news. Frappe Snowland is next, a favourite apparently, with loads of coins and boosts. Can't complain about that. Then Yoshi Valley, which they call a desert track. A bit confused here, it's more of a valley with giant Yoshi egg, and loads of shortcuts where you can easily fall off. They say you'll be skidding and dodging sandy jumps. Finally, Bowser Castle again, but this time, the proper fire and lava type. One of the longer tracks with coin-sapping hazards, thwomps and lava pits. Sounds like a right laugh if you're into that sort of thing. They recommend saving red shells for bottlenecks, a classic Mario Kart tactic, naturally. This page is a review for Mario Kart Super Circuit on the Game Boy Advance. Right there at the top you've got Donkey Kong front and center, looking a bit smug as usual. It's all about making the grade apparently, which sounds like they're talking about the new grading system in this Mario Kart. Instead of just winning cups to unlock everything, you have to actually play well and get graded from A to E. Fancy that, needing skill. There are a bunch of screenshots dotted around. You can see the usual suspects racing. Mario, Luigi, Peach, Toad, Yoshi, Bowser. The whole gang really. One screenshot highlights the speed start trick, which is still in, between the second and third lights. Another mentions green shells being annoying as always. Some things never change, eh? The reviewer seems pretty impressed, talking about the high level of quality and the glorious colours. They're saying it's got charm, and that the track design is simply awesome. Bit strong, maybe, but it probably looked amazing on the little GBA screen back then, compared to the old Game Boy games. They even reckon it's better than the N64 version in some ways, saying the tracks aren't as long and they're very well balanced. Bold claim that, but fair enough if they think so. They also mention needing coins for higher grades and unlocking courses, and mastering power sliding for a speed boost. Standard Mario Kart stuff really, but crucial if you want to get those top grades. Overall, it sounds like they're giving it a thumbs up, saying fans of the original SNES Mario Kart will like it. Pure class apparently. Bit much, but you get the idea, they reckon it's a good game. And yeah, the mushroom for shortcuts, that's a classic too. Can't have Mario Kart without mushrooms, can you? This page is a review of Mario Kart Super Circuit on the Game Boy Advance, and blimey, Did we need another Mario Kart game like a hole in the head back then? But Nintendo churned them out, didn't they? They slapped a massive 5-star rating on it, right there in a toadstool, so they're clearly pretty chuffed with it. The review goes on about how it's a return to the simple fun of the original SNES Mario Kart, ditching all the complicated tracks and hazards from the N64 one. Apparently, the controls are spot on, and the whole package is watertight, whatever that means. Sounds a bit dodgy to me. There's chat about graphical splendor, which, let's be honest, for a Game Boy Advance game it looks alright, doesn't it? They're banging on about shaving milliseconds off lap times for you time trial blokes. They mention there are new cups, mushroom, flower and star, and that the AI is improved so your computer opponents aren't complete pushovers apparently. They're even saying the cheating scumbags are gone, which I'll believe when I see it. Doo. Then there's a bit about retro multiplayer. They're saying you need to get your mates to buy their own copy if you want the full multiplayer experience, but you can do the single cart link-up thing if you're a bit stingy. That lets up to 4 of you play, but you're stuck with Yoshi and only get the SNES Mushroom Cup tracks. Still, better than out if you're stuck for races. Either. The review finishes up by saying it's got the best bits of both the SNES and N64 Mario Karts, and that for most people this was the one game for the GBA. Bit strong, isn't it? But yeah, it was a decent racer to be fair. They've got screenshots of the game dotted about, showing off the karts, characters like Mario, Luigi, Matta and Lakitu, and the usual podium scene. Looks like your typical Mario Kart chaos. This page is all about getting your mitts on Mario Kart Advance before it's even out here in the UK. Cheeky. Seems it's only TBA-ness on our release schedules, which is a bit of a pain, innit? But no worries, they've got you covered with 2 ways to get your karting fix early. First up, online shopping. Apparently you can pre-order an American copy of Mario Kart. Super Circuit they call it that over there. Sounds a bit naff to be honest, Super Circuit really. Anyway, they reckon you'll get it in a few days if you order from sites like ebgames.com or 42games.com. Just need a credit card and internet, which was still a bit of a novelty for some back then. Warrington Dorkery. Then there's the old faithful, import shops. They're saying you can ring up shops in the UK that do all the hard work for you, getting games from Japan and all that. They even give a shout out to CA Games in Glasgow, with their number, bless them. Apparently they get hold of the big games early. There's a price chart too, showing different shops selling imported carts. Cybernet, CA Games again, Another World, and Computer Exchange. Prices are around 40 quid to 55 quid, which is a fair whack more than you'd normally pay, but hey, early days, eh? You want it early, you pay the price. And they even remind you that dollar prices on US sites, you'll need to use a currency converter, like we're all daft. Still, Mario Kart on the Game Boy Advance, that's gotta be worth a look, even if you are importing it. This page screams early 2000s, doesn't it? Right then, it's all about Mario Kart Advance for the Game Boy Advance. It's pushing folks to check out online auctions for games, saying you can snag copies from Japanese importers. Remember when that was a thing? They are even giving tips on how not to get ripped off online, which was probably sound advice back in the day. Then the main bit is a competition to win a copy of Mario Kart Advance. Dead easy to enter, just match the screenshots of the tracks to the list of names underneath: Yoshi Desert, Ribbon Road, Snowland, Sunset Plains, Cheeseland and Hee-Ho Beach, all classics from Mario Kart on the SNES, and now shrunk down for the Game Boy Advance. You had to draw lines to match them up, and then write a little blurb about why you deserved a copy in 15 words or less. 3 copies up for grabs. Those were the days, eh? A paper competition for a handheld game. Simpler times. This page is a review for Backtrack on the Game Boy Advance. Blimey, a first-person shooter on the GBA. Back in 01, Nintendo was saying it was the ultimate 2D visuals machine, but here's Backtrack trying to push some 3D. The review reckons it's heavily influenced by Doom, which makes sense, right? It's set in a space station, all corridors and 90-degree corners, very Doom-like. They talk about rescuing your human mates as subquests. Apparently they've been assimilated by this cyborg army of terror called Domingoanias. Sounds a bit over the top, doesn't it? But hey, saving frozen humans, that's the mission. They mention the graphics being comparable to the humble handheld, and it's no GoldenEye obviously, but it's trying to be a proper 3D experience. They're saying time will tell if Doom GBA can beat Backtrack gameplay-wise. Bit of a dig at Doom there perhaps. It's got the usual space-age weapons, set in a dank space station which they say is like Hampton Court maze. They even mention your license to kill cyborgs and flying droids and even walking skeletons who've nicked hostages. Blimey, they've thrown everything in, haven't they? Price is £35, and you can link up to 4 Game Boys apparently for multiplayer, coming out in September. Looks alright for a GBA shooter, doesn't it? We were all keen to see if they could pull off a decent first-person game on that little screen. This page is a review for Backtrack on the Game Boy Advance. Looks like they are checking out the weapons in a section called Firing Range. They've got the laser gun, which is apparently meant to be for techie aliens but sounds like a pea shooter, according to the mag. Then there's the chain gun, a classic weapon of death, and the aerosol can, which sounds a bit Lynx deodorant-y but shoots flames. Finally, there's the bubble gun, using bubblegum as ammo, which they reckon is a bit odd. There are some little speech bubbles with funny comments about the weapons, like, the laser gun. Avoid like a smelly old man. Moving on, there's a section about multiplayer called Friends as Foes, covering Deathmatch and Matrix Assault. Deathmatch sounds pretty standard, first to 20 kills across 6 maps, no weapon pickups though, you have to use POD stations to swap characters and weapons, which is a bit of a strange system, but alright. Matrix Assault is about racking up kills with each of the 6 characters, 24 kills total. They say it's a tactical twist on Deathmatch, but the reviewer reckons Deathmatch is still better. The Mastery section talks about getting used to the controls and strafing with the L and R buttons, saying it makes gunfights fun and you can do all the sidestepping and circle strafing without framerate issues. They're impressed with the 3D levels on the GBA, saying it's astonishing for the handheld, especially coming so soon after launch. They mention Activision's Doom GBA is coming, but for now, they think Backtrack is the master blaster and give it a 4 out of 5. Which is pretty decent. Overall, sounds like a solid, if a bit quirky, GBA shooter for its time. This page is a review of Super Street Fighter 2 X Revival on the Game Boy Advance. Looks like Capcom are at it again, adding another X to a Street Fighter title, eh? Anyway, this is a handheld version of the classic Street Fighter 2, and they are calling it Revival. Fair enough, it's on the GBA, so it's a bit of a comeback for it on handhelds. Geety. The review price is 4,800 yen, which they reckon is about £28. You could play with a mate, 1 or 2 players, using one game cart, which is decent. It was out now in Japan, October in the US, and November for us, lucky lot in the UK. The reviewer seems to think it's alright. Says it's pretty much the same old Street Fighter 2 but on the Game Boy Advance. He mentions the artwork is all new and looks good on the handheld screen. There's screenshots showing Ryu and Zangief battling it out, Blanka doing his thing, and Guile facing M. Bison. Classic characters are all there, Cammy and Fei Long, making their first appearance since the original game, apparently. They mention the controls being a bit of an issue on the GBA, buttons not being ideal for fighters, and aching knuckles are a given. They also mention the control system is a bit strange, needing to hold the light attack button for medium attacks, which sounds a bit fiddly. Still, they reckon it's a good conversion and enjoyable, especially for newcomers. They give it a decent 4 out of 5. Not bad for a portable punch-up on the go. This page is a review of Spider-Man, Mysterio's Menace on the Game Boy Advance. Looks like Spidey's first outing on the GBA, and they reckon it's a decent comic book style romp, which is fair enough, that's what you want from a Spider-Man game, isn't it? They've given it 4 out of 5, so it's not half bad for a handheld Spidey adventure back then. The reviewer is saying the levels are well designed and feel comic booky, which is a plus. Story is the usual Spidey stuff. Criminal underworld causing trouble. They talk about scaling walls, swinging, and punching bad guys, all the standard Spider-Man moves. Apparently the animation is top-notch for the GBA, especially Spidey and the villains. There's a little box mentioning health pickups turn Spidey blue, which is a bit odd, but hey, it's a game. Call. Down at the bottom, there's a bit about arachnid acrobatics showing off Spidey's moves. Stealth, swing, smack, and snare. Stealth for being sneaky, swinging to get around fast, smack is punching, obviously, and snare is web-gooing enemies. Standard Spidey fare really. Many. There are a few screenshots of the game, looks like classic side-scrolling action, and a little picture of Spidey having a go at Rhino, who always was a bit of a brick wall. Overall, seems like a solid handheld Spider-Man game for the GBA back in the day. This page reviews a couple of Game Boy Advance titles. First up we've got Atlantis, based on the Disney film. Blimey, the reviewer absolutely rips into it. They call it a dire platformer, right off the bat, saying it's so simple even a spongiest-brained cretin could beat it. They reckon the graphics are awful, complaining about the C-grade character animation, and saying it's a waste of the GBA's power. Apparently it's just really boring and generic, not living up to the film at all, just another platformer that feels like deja vu. They give it a single star so you know it's a proper stinker. Novel. Then we have MX 2002. Featuring Ricky Carmichael. Now, motocross games, they were alright back then, but Ricky Carmichael wasn't exactly a household name over here, was he? The review starts off pretty unenthusiastic, saying no one was exactly dribbling with excitement for it. Apparently it's a bit of a mess visually, you have to squint at the screen to figure out what's going on, and the graphics are a mix of polygons and sprites that don't quite gel. They do give it a bit of credit for trying something new and being brave, but ultimately say it's shallow and repetitive, just holding down a button and wiggling around. They compare it to an early prototype and give it 2 stars, so a bit better than Atlantis but still not great. The reviewer ends with a bit of sarcasm, saying it moves like a drunken leper, which is a bit harsh, even for them back then. This page features a couple of reviews for Game Boy Advance games, Klonoa Empire of Dreams and Denki Blocks. First up, it's Klonoa Empire of Dreams. Sounds a bit like the usual platforming fare, some evil bloke nicking dreams again, so it's down to our hero, Klonoa, to sort it out across various worlds. They say it's platforming with a bit of puzzle solving thrown in, and you can grab enemies like Kirby to reach new areas. The reviewer reckons it gets a bit more involved later on, and mentions comparing it to Wario Land 3, which was a decent puzzle platformer back in the day. They call it moderately adorable and occasionally challenging, but ultimately just another platformer, and reckon it probably won't even get a UK release. Ouch, harsh. They give it a 3 out of 5, which isn't exactly glowing praise, is it? They do mention the visuals are nice though, calling it a bit of a treat to look at. Then there's Denki Blocks. Now this looks more interesting, a puzzle game. It's described as a block-moving puzzler, where you have to fit colored blocks together. Simple premise, but they reckon it's well done. Apparently white blocks complicate things, stopping some blocks from moving, which sounds like it could get properly head-scratching. They say it starts easy but gets challenging later, especially in the later levels that require specific shapes. They also highlight a multiplayer mode, where you can pass the GBA around, which was standard for the time before everyone had their own handhelds. The reviewer seems properly impressed, calling it a well-thought-out game, with a stupefyingly simple concept and masterfully crafted difficulty. A much better score for this one, a 4 out of 5. Sounds like Denki Blocks might be a bit of a hidden gem then, even if it looks a bit basic. This page is the Planet Guide section. Looks like we've got tips and cheats for a few games. First up is Ask Oak. It's Professor Oak giving advice about Pokemon. Seems like some young lad called Dan from Dundee is struggling to beat Ash Ketchum in Pokemon Silver. Oak's advice is basically, level up your monsters, know your enemy, and use type advantages, specifically recommending a rollout TM for Snorlax. He even lists Ash's team: Pikachu, Venusaur, Blastoise, Espeon, Charizard and Snorlax, all at pretty high levels, the cheeky bugger. Moo. Next we've got GT Advance cheats for the Game Boy Advance. Unlock extra 2 feet mode, unlock all tracks, all cars, all tune-ups and view credits, all by holding R and L and pressing different buttons. Pretty standard stuff for cheat codes back then. Gina. Then there's Iridian, another GBA game. Level codes are listed, typical passwords, and an unlimited lives and full weapon powers cheat, again, password-based. Handy for a tough shooter I suppose. Powerpuff Girls on the Game Boy Color is next. Cheats here are simple passwords, undead for unlimited lives, and BILLHUDSON to unlock everything. Bit cheeky even considering cheats for a Powerpuff Girls game, isn't it? Cool. Finally, we have GB Action replay codes for the Game Boy Color. Spider-Man 2, Commander Keen, Alone in the Dark, and Pokemon Puzzle Challenge all get a mention. Loads of hex codes for infinite health, lives, continues, keys, all crystals, stop timers, max scores. Action replay was the business back in the day for cheating your way through these games. Looking at Alone in the Dark there, be afraid no longer. Bit dramatic for a Game Boy Color game, eh? Pokemon Puzzle Challenge, stop timer. Well, that takes the challenge out of it, doesn't it? This page is the Game Boy Gallery section, right? They've called it the Best Muti Album in the World EVR, Part 33. Bit dramatic, but alright. It's basically showcasing readers' Game Boy camera snaps, and they're all a bit, well, muty as they say. There's a winner section for someone who apparently overdosed on 3D platformers, Banjo-Kazooie mentioned there, poor sod. Then there's a bunch of these Game Boy camera pics. Cardiff's Wayne Milford sent one in that looks like Alan on a Monday morning apparently. Bristol's Bella sent in her perfect freak. Norway's Eskil Vestra sent in a spooky one. Lancashire's Edward Murdoch's last pork pie is featured. Gareth Ifans from Swansea is answering a pie location question. Someone called Gary Monroe from Halifax is anticipating the Metroid FPS Metroid Prime on GameCube. I suppose they mean, not an N64 thing obviously, but fair enough. There's Chris and Claire Healy, Graver robbing horrors. Amy Redmond in Cork should not stash corpses in her GBC. Ellie Masters in York says Pikachu is the devil. David Fryer in Devon's pick is either mutant art or modern art. Nick Baldwin from Sussex did apple bobbing in acid, which is never a good idea. Mary Wells from Kidderminster got a close-up of her colon. Claire Parsons from Grimsby used arcane innovatively. Martin Dwight from Barnsley has a muty volcano, and Matt Stevens from Poole is a victim of wind changing. Blimey. They are giving away a Game Boy Action Pack by Joytech. Looks like a carry case and bits and bobs, if you send in your pictures to the address at the bottom. Right then. This page is all about Galleon, right? Looking back at this, it's a proper N64 Magazine special investigation. They're banging on about how they had to travel all the way to Bristol for this one, which is a bit dramatic, even for them. It's all about this game Galleon, which they're saying is from the bloke who made Lara Croft. Bit of a claim. That, especially back then, Tomb Raider was massive. They're saying it's the next generation of platforming, and not just about pirates, which is a bit of a tease. Seems like they sent their Alan down to Bristol to see Confounding Factor. That's the developer, and he came back gibbering apparently. Something about, it's all in the stick, which sounds a bit dodgy, doesn't it? But they're saying he was blown away by the new ideas they had for gaming. Apparently ideas everyone wished they'd done, but couldn't. Intriguing, that is. There's an info burst bit, but it's weird it's for GameCube. Hang on a minute, this is an N64 mag, isn't it? Oh, I see, it's looking ahead probably. Says it's from Interplay 1 disc, single player, Rumble. Yeah, Rumble was good. No GBA link or online play, typical for the time. Release dates, 2006, November for the US, spring for us Brits, and TBA for Japan. And they've given it full marks for anticipation, all 5 red blobs, so they were clearly well chuffed with it. There's some screenshots dotted about, and a big picture of the main bloke, Rama, I suppose. Looks a bit blocky, but that's the style back then, polygonal everything. They've got little call-out boxes too, saying Ramarma suddenly realizes the surroundings are pretty, and that every new place you go to, you'll want to have a look around. Sounds like they were trying to build up the atmosphere and exploration side of things. Platforming from the Tomb Raider guy, not pirates, and some amazing new ideas. They were really selling Galleon here, weren't they? Wonder if it lived up to the hype. This page is all about Galleon, right? Toby Gard's new game. Blimey, remember Toby Gard? He was the bloke behind Lara Croft back in the day. Seems he left Core Design and set up his own shop, Confounding Factor, and Galleon is his baby now. The main article is about the lock and key system. It's described as a bit like Zelda, but not really. You press X to lock on, and a point appears to interact with stuff. Apparently you can circle this point Zelda style, or get your mates in the game to go to where you're pointing. Sounds a bit quirky, doesn't it? They say it's surprisingly versatile for such a simple system. Then there's a Who He section introducing some of the Galleon characters. First up is Rama Sabria, who's supposed to be your character. He's a mix of James Bond, Han Solo, and Captain Birdseye. Bit of a strange combo that. They call him an all-purpose adventurer with dry humor. Then there's Faith, the daughter of this healer called Aureliano. She wants to follow in her dad's footsteps, and while she's not a fighter, she's described as feisty. Early in the game you apparently meet her and team up. Next is Jabez, who they say oozes sinister vibes from the get-go. He apparently chows down on herbs for godlike powers. Sounds dodgy. And lastly there's Mihoko, who was on the cover, apparently. She's from across the western seas, and is meant to be dead fast and dangerous, even handier in a fight than Rama. Sounds like a right tough minx. Boo! So yeah, Galleon, Toby Gard's new thing. Looks interesting enough, bit different from Tomb Raider, that's for sure. Let's see if it lives up to the hype. October 2001 this magazine is, so we're getting close to Christmas game season, innit? This page seems to be doing a special investigation on something called Rama. Looks like they're going over the controls, which are pretty standard GameCube fare. A is jump, B is attack, Y is block, and X is lock on. They're mentioning a C-stick menu that lets you issue orders to your companion Mihoko, ask for healing, and select weapons, all without pausing the game. Sounds like they're trying to keep things flowing. There's a section called Gods and Monsters, talking about big boss battles, where you have to climb on them and hammer away. Apparently the AI is so frightening that playtesters were getting bored during cutscenes and just wandering off. Bit sarcastic there, cheeky. Becca. Then there's Adventure Island, a section about subsections in the game. They mention a bit where you and Mihoko are on an island with Greek types doing physical competitions, specifically a flagnab game against 3 other pairs. Sounds like a bit of a laugh. There are also swimming and running races. They're saying it's all in-game engine and showing off the character's abilities. And they've got a little box about a character called Urk, saying he looks dumb but is good at chess. Alright then, sounds like a bit of a mixed bag but potentially fun. This page is taking a look at some sort of action-adventure game, calling itself Finish him! Which, cheeky title that is, reminds me a bit of Mortal Kombat, though this looks nothing like it. It's going on about how you use a stick in combat. Apparently you need a stick, a lock-on button and a jump button to get going. The game features a character called Rama, and the review is explaining how you fight. It sounds like you can pull off different moves by moving the stick in various ways and hitting buttons, and string together combos to smack enemies against walls, which sounds properly satisfying. They're even teasing that swords come into play later on. Intriguing stuff. Atala. There's a bit about talking heads and cutscenes. Apparently there are loads of them, like 450, all done in the game engine and synced to voice acting, which they reckon is decent for the time. The town in the game is full of folk who just get on with their day, which is a nice touch for atmosphere. Apparently Rama is quite the independent fella and will just grab onto things without being told, which they call him a bright chap for. Bit sarcastic that, eh? They're showing off some of the fighting moves with captions like, backwards on the stick and it's a bit of the back kick, and pow! And he thumps against the wall. Sweet! Sounds like they're having a right laugh with it. Swimming is apparently stick controlled only. No need for the A button. Interesting choice. They're comparing the fights to something out of a kung fu swashbuckling movie, which paints a fun picture. They mention the lighting effects took ages to get right, but they think it was worth the effort. And from the screenshots, it does look quite nice for its time. Overall, they're saying the game gives you a thrill of being an acrobat, and has its own unique style. From the controls to the character's spindly legs, calling it a new type of gaming. Sounds like they're quite impressed with this one. The next page is all about Galleon, remember that one? Groovy mover it says at the top, which is a bit of a cringe title, even back then. They're showing off the movement system in the game, which they're calling Gymnastics Galleon style. First up is Run. They point out Rama's movement is fully analog, which was quite a big deal at the time for some games, and he can build up speed. Apparently turning fast on slippery surfaces will make him slide, which sounds like it could be a bit annoying, but also adds to the realism, I suppose. Then there's Swing. Rama can just jump up and hang on things, no monkeying around. They're saying you have freedom to roam, and that confounding factor, the developers, found people taking different routes, which is quite cool and shows off the level design flexibility. Next is Climb. If a surface has enough friction, Rama can climb it, and he can even climb upside down. They reckon there are no approximations and everything is spot on, and no surfaces he won't touch. Sounds ambitious. Finally, Crouch! Apparently you automatically squidge down to get into smaller areas, so no need to press a dedicated crouch button, which is quite streamlined. They claim it all works without dodgy physics, and seems completely normal. Bit of a backhanded compliment there from the magazine if you ask me, implying other games do have dodgy physics. Duo. There are some little speech bubbles in the middle. One says, time to put those broad shoulders to use and show great strength, eh? And, the water surface undulates just like real wet stuff. Nicely. Bit of a dig at graphics maybe, but they were pushing the N64 hardware, weren't they? TD. Down at the bottom, under visuals, they're talking about how you can pull off Hollywood-worthy antics without being killed by capricious collision detection. They're impressed with the physics system and how Rama's position and attack varies from a simple punch to a judo throw. They mention Toby Gard, the bloke who created Lara Croft in Tomb Raider, being involved, which explains the platforming emphasis. They say you can just look at a wall or ledge and know if it's climbable, which is good design. The game relies on the analog stick, and it's all about skill and how you use it. They reckon it's difficult to convey how fluidly it all works, but you'll be experimenting with jumping around, swinging on ceilings, and landing impossibly on wafer-thin planks. Sounds like they're trying to sell the game's movement as its main draw, which, given the Tomb Raider connection, isn't surprising. This page is an N64 special investigation, which sounds a bit grand for a games magazine piece, doesn't it? It's all about a game that seems to be pushing the N64 a bit late in its life, October 2001, just before the GameCube arrived, so fair play to them. G. The main image is this rather angular-looking woman with a sword. She's quite striking in a polygonal kind of way. There are screenshots, dotted around, of what looks like a medievalish world. One bit talks about tight bodices and heaving bosoms, typical lads mag humor really, and then a line about David Hasselhoff which is just daft. They're going on about waterfalls being impressive, and they're right for the N64. Water effects could be a bit ropey sometimes, so if they're showing off a good waterfall it was probably something to shout about back then. They mention the GameCube, making it easy, cheeky dig at the new kid on the block there. Warringtons. There's talk of Rama, sounds like the fella in the screenshots, being flexible and strangers not being welcome round here. They also mention bouncing off walls and throwing your chums about, which sounds like a bit of a laugh if you're into that sort of thing. Reading on, they're saying the character's movement is smooth, no skating about, which was a common problem back then. They're comparing it to Hollywood action, which is always a bit of an exaggeration, but they're saying it's quite athletic and satisfying to play without being too punishing. It sounds like they're trying to make a game that's accessible, even your dad could play it apparently. The focus is on story, characters, puzzles, and acrobatics. They're throwing in a Zorro comparison, leaping around, and landing on a peso, which is a bit random, but paints a picture of swashbuckling action. Overall they're pretty positive about it, saying it's got secrets and you can play it loads of times, and they're teasing more info soon. Sounds like they're building it up nicely. This page is a special investigation piece titled, What Went at Retro ST? By Matt Casamassina. It's all about Retro Studios and the troubles they were having back in the day. The headline screams about multiple redundancies, Metroid Prime in trouble, and now Raven Blade cancelled, which is pretty dramatic stuff. They're asking, what's going on at Nintendo's most important US development house? The article starts by explaining how Retro Studios came about after the former Iguana Entertainment president left and set up shop in Austin, Texas. Apparently they hired a bunch of talented people from big studios like Styned Software and Electronic Arts, so expectations were high. Jock. It sounds like they had a few projects in the works, including some rather ambitious titles like Car Combat, Football 2002, something described as a Vigilante 8 killer, Raven Blade, which was a third-person RPG, and of course the first-person shooter that would become Metroid Prime. The article mentions that by August of that year, Car Combat, Football 2002, and Raven Blade had all been canned, and even Metroid Prime wasn't in a playable state yet. Ouch. B. There's a little side note saying, a retro job ad not a common sight these days, next to a cropped image of a job advert. The advert itself is for programmers for the next Metroid game, talking about working on a next-generation gaming system and Revolution video properties. Bit of classic marketing speak, that. Warring text then delves into why things were going wrong. Apparently, there was friction between the engineers and artists, with each blaming the other for slow progress. The engineers were called lazy for slow code, and the artists were unrealistic in their designs. Sounds like typical studio grumbles, eh? They also point the finger at disorganized management who were favoring certain projects and didn't really know what they were doing to keep things on track. The conclusion seems to be that Retro Studios were burning through cash at an alarming rate. On the right-hand side, there's a big picture of Samus Aran standing outside the Retro Studios building. You can even see the RETRO sign on the building. Bit of a stark image really, considering all the problems they were having. Makes you wonder how they pulled it together to eventually deliver Metroid Prime in the end, doesn't it? This page is a bit of a downer really, talking about cancelled games from Retro Studios, remember them? It's headlined, Wrong Udios, a bit of a cheeky play on words. First up is Football 2002, cancelled of course. Sounds like they were going for an American football game, but with questionable taste in cheerleaders if you catch my drift. The magazine even jokes about jiggle sickos. Bit much, even for back then. They reckon it was canned due to early development issues and licensing problems, probably for the best if the cheerleaders were anything to go by. Then there's Car Combat, which was apparently almost done for the GameCube launch. A Vigilante 8 style game they say, which actually sounds pretty decent. Shame Nintendo shut that down, could have been a laugh. Bless 'em, the magazine says, a bit sarcastically I think. Next up is Raven Blade, an ambitious RPG that also got the axe. Apparently it was shown off in May but then binned. Beautiful art, but too ambitious even for GC, it says. Sounds like they were aiming high, maybe too high for the GameCube's early days. The knives really are out at Retro, they quip. Finally, it mentions Metroid being unveiled at Space World 2001 as a 3D first-person adventure. That's interesting, this must be before we actually saw much of Prime. They say, Metroid will be finally unveiled to a skeptical crowd at Space World 2001. Skeptical crowd, eh? Well, we know how that turned out, don't we? They were worried about the fate of Retro Studios hinging on this Metroid game. Foreshadowing or what? Metra. Overall it paints a picture of Retro Studios having a bit of a rough time early on. Loads of projects being binned by Nintendo. Makes you wonder how Metroid Prime even got made in the end. This page is shouting at you to win a Nintendo GameCube. Blimey, everyone wanted a GameCube back then, didn't they? It's an advert for a competition from a place called CA Games in Glasgow. Apparently they're giving away a GameCube. It's promoting the next-gen console, talking about it being a next-gen miracle, and mentioning games like Luigi's Mansion, Wave Race, Blue Storm, and Super Monkey Ball. They're really pushing the boat out, saying it's the world's most advanced slab of gaming technology. Bit much, but we were all excited about the GameCube at the time. CA Games seemed to be a shop in Glasgow, run by Charlie Ambrose and his team. They've even got a picture of themselves dressed up as Charlie's Angels. That's a laugh. They're saying they're a good place to get your Nintendo games, even N64, Game Boy Advance, and regular Game Boy stuff at decent prices. And if you want to win a GameCube, you have to answer the question, courtesy of Who Are We, managed to bring you this once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to win a GameCube. The answer being CA Games, obviously. They've even put their phone number in if you fancy giving them a bell. Right then, onwards. This page is shouting about winning a Nintendo GameCube. Blimey, those were the days, weren't they? It's a competition tied in with Luigi's Mansion, which was a big deal back then, finally Luigi getting his own game and not just being Mario's sidekick. To enter you had to sculpt your own Luigi. They said you could use anything like plasticine, clay, even papier-mâché, whatever you could get your hands on. They weren't after drawings, mind you, it had to be a proper three-dimensional Luigi. The winner got a GameCube and a game to go with it. Not bad, eh? You had to post your Luigi off to them at Future Publishing in Bath, and the deadline was the 1st of October. Looking back, it was a clever way to get everyone excited about the GameCube launch and Luigi's Mansion. This page is the Club 64 section from an N64 magazine, and it's looking like the October 2001 issue. It's all about getting the most out of your Nintendo 64, which was the name of the game back then, even if the console was starting to show its age a bit by this point. The main feature this month is Majora's Mask, which was Zelda's Ace sequel as they call it. Bit of an odd one that. Darker and stranger than Ocarina of Time, and they were showing off some bits they weren't supposed to be doing, probably glitches or secrets. Always good to have a poke around and see what you could find, wasn't it? Brr. There are a few regular sections listed, Club 64 mailbox, for readers' letters, and they mention playing Mario Kart, a classic for multiplayer. Tips extra, with advice, and they're even offering a $5 off a Game Boy Advance. Trying to shift them, I suppose. Game On, probably previews and reviews of games. I'm the Best is for scores and high scores. Always good for bragging rights. Millennium Club 2001, sounds like a community feature, maybe about tournaments or something. Dr. Kit's Game Clinic is a bit of an advice column, with a jokey line about house calls. Directory is likely game reviews or listings to see if a game is worth buying. And lastly, subscriptions if you wanted the magazine delivered. Warintku. Standard stuff for a gaming magazine back then, all about the N64 in its twilight years really. October 2001, must have been getting close to the GameCube launch. This page from the mailbox section kicks off with a star letter, about a bloke spotting Mario's hat in a picture from an old textbook. Bit of a laugh, thinking Shigsy nicked his ideas, but the editor playfully suggests the letter writer drew the hat on themselves. Cheeky? Still, they win a GBA Essentials pack for their trouble. Oh. Next up, Tom from Cumbria is having a right moan about the GameCube being delayed in Australia. He's worried about Pale region issues if he imports. The editor sets him straight on the Pale thing, but does confirm Nintendo are switching to discs for the Cube. They reckon this disc move is attracting big names like Namco, who are doing Tekken and Soul Calibur, and even Metal Gear Solid thanks to Kojima. Seems Nintendo are trying to get their act together. Then there's a correction corner, where readers are pointing out the magazine's goofs. Someone called Sam noticed caption errors in the GameCube special in issue 56, and another error about foot and mouth and Dutch Tazos in issue 59. Bit embarrassing, innit? David's moaning about a Mario Party 3 release date mix-up in issue 57, and Daniel's confused about page numbers in issue 1. Classic magazine errors, we've all seen them. Another letter titled Clawback talks about Nintendo needing to get serious and release top-tier games like Luigi's Mansion, Wave Race, and even Tekken and Tomb Raider on the GameCube to compete with Sony. They reckon it's about getting the casual gamers on board. Sean from Essex seems to know his stuff. Lastly, Marco from Surrey is fuming because his cheatbook was missing from his magazine. He's threatening to rip the packet to pieces. Bit dramatic, but I suppose getting your cheatbook missing is a proper letdown back then, before the internet made cheat codes so easy to find. This page showcases the Club 64 mailbox section, which is basically the letters page in it. First up, there's an apology from Ed about a stuff up with issue 57's tips book. Apparently Steve's microprocessor went a bit wonky, and subscribers got the wrong booklet, classic N64 mag. Then there's a letter from a Chris Davidson in Cheshire, whose mum has painted all 150 Pokemon on his bedroom wall, bless her. He mentions Mr. Mime and Magmar as favourites, each Pokemon being about a quarter of actual size. Sounds like a lot of effort. Mums are great like that, aren't they? Next, a Tom Pike from Swanage was watching Malcolm in the Middle and playing his Game Boy. He was bored and trying to figure out the Game Boy. Not exactly riveting stuff, but there you go. Ruth Herbert from Coventry is asking about using the GameCube's internet feature for downloading game demos and music software, mentioning Music Generator on the PlayStation 2, and trading music. She also asks about a Pokemon trading game online. They were definitely getting ahead of themselves with the GameCube online stuff back then, a bit of a pipe dream for many at the time. Ed responds saying it's a nice idea and asks what else Nintendo should do to make the GameCube better, suggesting Mario Kart Ghost data downloads. That was a good shout actually. Lastly, there's a bum deal letter about the Game Boy Zelda games Oracle of Seasons and Oracle of Ages, supposedly disappearing from release lists, so the reader went to HMV to check it out. Bit dramatic calling it a bum deal for that. At the side there's a picture of the GameCube modem adapter with text saying it gives you access to the internet, groundbreaking stuff at the time, though not much you could actually do with it game-wise back then beyond some online lobbies for a handful of games. Down below in Surf's Up, they've got website recommendations. First one is homepage of Adam Stone, artist at members.madasafish.com. Sounds a bit clunky of a web address. Apparently it's a tidy site with good design and reviews of N64 classics, like Perfect Dark and Majora's Mask, with drawings of Joanna Dark, Resident Evil's Liquor, and random animals. Sounds like a typical fan site of the time. The other site is RareLair, at rarelair.i8.com. Another of those free web address sites, can't imagine they're still going. It's an Australian Rare website, and apparently if you don't look around, Greg will cut your feet off. Bit of a weird threat, but alright. Recent updates include Donkey Kong Racing sneaking onto the site. Sounds like a fan site dedicated to rare games, which were always top-notch on the N64. This page of Club 64, or Mailbox as they've called it here, is the letters page. Always a good bit of light reading to see what the readers are moaning about. First up, Nathan from Farnborough is hoping the GameCube games are as good as GoldenEye and Zelda on the N64, which is a fair shout, those were proper classics. Ed's just being cheeky, saying yeah, those cartridges did feel nice. Someone called Christopher Richards is miffed, his name was left out. Seems Ed's having a laugh about squashing his name, alright. Then Alan Doyle in Scotland is complaining about fingerprints on his GBA. Probably should wash your hands after eating crisps, mate. Lewis Brundish is having a pop at old what's-her-name, must be someone in the news at the time, saying it's time to attack Mark, whatever that means, and Ed just says, just try it. Bit of a non-committal answer there, Ed. Johnny from Bexhill C is asking how long it takes to make magazines compared to Zelda and PlayStation games. Ed's just being sarcastic again. This is a trick question, right? Luke Boyer reckons they don't need badges. Ed just replies, fine. George Blanchard is just sticking it to them somewhere. Bit cryptic, and Ed says, ooh no, I don't like the mental picture I'm getting. Jonathan Baverstock stayed away from cows, which is a bit random, and Ed's just, even worse. Ian Phillips in Belfast is asking if he can ask a question. Ed says nope, just being silly again. Paul Oliver from Southampton is shocked by the swearing in Conker, which was a bit much for some, and Ed just says you want to try working with Steve. Terrible it is. And Sharky via email has written something that sounds like kids talk. Borborski watnan.nun. And Ed just says how nice. Typical letters page banter. Over on the right there's a section called Any Plans, and someone called KL Jackson from Cleveland is asking why THQ can the Indiana Jones game on N64, and if there's any chance it'll still come out. Turns out THQ decided against it due to difficulties converting it from NTSC to PAL, which is a pain for us in the UK. PAL conversions were always a bit dodgy. And no future plans for an indie game on GameCube either, apparently. Then there's a love section. Chris Horner, from Northern Ireland, was watching cartoons late at night and saw a cartoon where someone said, I don't want that. I like games with plumbers. He reckons it's a Mario reference, and says he loves the magazine and Andrea in particular. Ed just says, how odd. I mean the Andrea thing, of course. Underneath is, so tell me this, James Poynton from Oxford is asking about GameCube games being compatible with the internet, Wario games on GameCube, and Wario in Smash Bros. Melee. Ed says internet compatibility is likely for online games, Wario games are expected on GameCube, and no chance of Wario being in Smash Melee, as Rare, who made Wario Land, are with Microsoft now. Shame about that, Wario Land games were always good fun. Fize. Felipe Basaglia from Holland is asking about a Game Boy Advance camera. Ed reckons there will be one and guesses it'll link up with the GameCube, and that it'll probably be for Pokemon games. Tony Dix from Huddersfield is asking whatever happened to Jungle Emperor Leo. Ed reckons it disappeared when Talent Maker games came out for the 64DD, and because the 64DD bombed, they axed it. Never heard of Jungle Emperor Leo myself, sounds a bit obscure. B. Tom Salter from West Midlands is asking about a Harry Potter game for GameCube and Jet Force Gemini 2. Ed thinks a Harry Potter game is likely, but no word on Jet Force Gemini 2, which is a shame. Jet Force Gemini was a proper rare shooter, that was. Matthew Dix from Tyne&Ware is asking about the Shadow Man movie and a Shadow Man 2 game for GameCube. Ed reckons the Shadow Man movie is stuck in production hell, with Ice Cube supposed to be playing Mike Leroy, and Shadow Man 2 on GameCube is likely. Shadow Man was a bit of a dark horse game back then, but quite good. So, standard letters page really, bit of reader interaction, answers to common questions, and the usual cheeky comments from Ed. Nothing too groundbreaking, but always worth a flick through. This page is the letters page, or board mailbox as they called it back then, in N64 Magazine. We kick off with a bloke called Jim Hegarty showing off his massive N64 collection, and fair play to him, it is pretty impressive, takes up half his room. Ed from the mag is having a bit of a laugh, suggesting he'll need to wheel out Miyamoto himself to catalogue it all. Then we've got a couple of readers asking about GameCube games. One fella wants to know if Half-Life is coming to the Cube, which, at the time, we were all wondering, but no, not on the cards back then. Another bloke asks about Mystical Ninja on GameCube, and a follow-up to Hybrid Heaven. Poor sod, they basically tell him not to hold his breath for either, especially Hybrid Heaven, which, let's be honest, while quirky, wasn't exactly crying out for a sequel. There's also a section with readers' artwork, which is always a bit of a mixed bag on these pages. Someone's drawn Majora's Mask stuff, classic Zelda of course. There's a drawing of a girl with a gun, a Link picture, and then something truly bizarre. A bloke made entirely of vomit. Bit grim, even for a letters page. They reckon it probably stinks. Charming. This page is all about how to mess about with your copy of The Legend of Zelda Majora's Mask, trying to find glitches, wrecking havoc as they put it. It's written by Alan Madrell. They're calling it Miyamoto's masterpiece and wondering if it's even possible to glitch, which of course it is. Plenty of games had their quirks back then. In the What We Said bit, they're bragging about reviewing Majora's Mask in issue 49 and giving it a stonking 96%. They were clearly chuffed with it, saying it was a stunning, bewilderingly accomplished sequel, and a hair's breadth from perfection. High praise indeed back then. The main bit is titled, Freeze the Game, and it's all about how to, freeze your game. Method 1 is in Sakon's hideout on the final day. You use the hookshot on the conveyor belt when Kaffy steps on the switch, hold Z and a C button and sidestep onto the switch. Apparently, inexplicably, that freezes the game. Method 2 is similar, but you get your ocarina ready before going into Sakon's hideout. Just before the cutscene starts, you hammer the appropriate C button. Apparently, it only works if you press the button at just the right moment. Sounds fiddly. Method 3 and 4 are marked Import Only. Method 3 is about using Minilink, which I remember was a feature in this magazine, and talking to citizens to change their speech. Depending on who you talk to, like the bombers or the observatory bloke, or citizens, something goes south. Not entirely clear what, but they say it's simple to make the game go wrong. Method 4 is another import trick, using the Onilink trick to get the fierce deity mask out in the wild. But instead of putting on the mask, you try to use the giant's mask. Apparently this makes Link judder violently, and they describe it as disturbing. Bit dramatic, isn't it? Seems like they were having a right laugh trying to break Majora's Mask. Good times. This page is from the Club 64 How-To section, and it's all about Zelda, Majora's Mask. They're digging into a couple of interesting tricks here. First up, it's Run Rabbit Run, for a speed boost. Apparently you've got to head to the milk bar, play a song for Toto the Zora in all your different forms, put on the bunny hood, have another word with Toto, and then play the song again under the spotlight. Seems like a right faff, but supposedly it makes you run super fast, inexplicably like they say, like a loon, until you leave the bar. Right then. Next up is Fly, Zora Fly, which is a bit more exciting, proper Zora mask flying. You need to be near the tunnel in the wall on the shore, kill a like, stand on the shore where the like was, and then as you start to float, press A again, and head back to land. Then, apparently if you keep tapping A you can fly about anywhere. They even mention a third-party joypad with auto-fire might help, which takes me back. They do warn you'll glide back down eventually, so don't expect to be soaring forever. There's also a bit called Import Only, where they're talking about glitches and how some of them only work on American or Japanese versions of games. Bit of a downer for us PAL gamers back in the day, wasn't it? But they reassure us there's still a lot of fun stuff to do in the PAL version, mind. Always was. Even without all the import shenanigans. Classic N64 Magazine, finding all the weird and wonderful stuff in games. This page in N64 Magazine, well, it's all about exploits in Majora's Mask. Sakon's hideout is the focus here, and they're showing you how to sneak in there early, before you're even supposed to. Apparently, if you use the bunny hood and roll into a crack in the wall, you can get in on the first or second day. Bit cheeky that, isn't it? If you do manage it, it seems the place is deserted and a bit broken because you've messed with the game's timing. Oni Link, that's what they called Fierce Deity Link back then. This one's for playing as Fierce Deity Link outside of boss fights. You need to do it during the cafe bit, using masks and pausing at the right moment. Sounds like a right faff, but if you pull it off, you can run around as Fierce Deity Link anywhere in the game. They even have a screenshot of it. Says it's import only, which is a bit of a pain if you haven't got a Japanese console. Still, looks like a laugh to mess about with. Remember spending hours trying these glitches back then? Good times. This page, right then, it's a bit of a random tricks and tips page, titled Miscellany of Madness, which is about right for some of these things. First up, it's make Epona fall off a hill. Apparently in Zelda Majora's Mask, if you're wanting to be a bit of a cruel sod, you can make poor Epona fall off a cliff. They say you just have to edge her along parallel to a ledge, and she'll eventually topple over. Bit mean-spirited, if you ask me, but there you go, that's what some gamers get up to. Rackler. Next we've got make stuff disappear. This one's about using the postboxes in Majora's Mask. They reckon you can shove items like the hookshot, Great Fairy's sword, or even the bow into a postbox, and they'll become invisible. Apparently the hookshot is the most spectacular when it doesn't work, whatever that means. Sounds a bit daft, to be honest. Why would you want to make your stuff disappear? Then there's Oni can't use bottles. Right, this is about the Fierce Deity Mask, also in Majora's Mask. It says if you're in a boss battle as Fierce Deity Link, you can't use bottles. If you try to use a bottle, apparently Oni Link just keeps swiping with his sword, interrupting the bottling. They say it takes quick button presses to maybe get it to work. Seems like a bit of a non-trick, more like a game limitation they're pointing out. After that, it's X-ray vision. This one sounds a bit more interesting. It's about getting a peek through walls in Majora's Mask. You walk up to a wall, hold forward, roll into it, and as Link gets up, press A and top C. If timed right, you might see through the wall. They suggest trying it in the stock pot in. Looks like they couldn't quite get it to work properly in their screenshot though, judging by the comment. Lastly, it's keep rollin', rollin', rollin'. This one's about rolling into walls in Majora's Mask again. Apparently if you roll into a wall and hammer the A button, sometimes Link does these silent rolls, without the thud noise. It's a bit hit and miss and only lets you do a few rolls at a time, but they say it's good for a giggle. They even suggest trying the same thing in Ocarina of Time. Sounds like a bit of a pointless glitch really, but hey, each to their own. And that's your lot for this page of random Majora's Mask weirdness. The next page is all about tips and tricks for some top N64 games, labeled Tips Extra. Kicking things off is Conker's Bad Fur Day with a tip on how to skip that long intro, which was a godsend back in the day. Proper time saver that was. Apparently if you go into the cheat menu and put in the wrong code twice, you get a right cheeky insult from the game. Cheeky Fire Imp they called it. Wouldn't print what it is though, typical. Next up is Banjo-Tooie. This one is about turning Kazooie into a dragon. To do it you need the Mega Globo from the ice chest in Glitter Gulch Mine, then take it to Humba Wumba near Witchy World. Always thought Dragon Kazooie was a bit of a beast, very handy for certain bits in the game. Chuasu. Mario Tennis is next, with a couple of service tips. First is the cheap service. Move to the inside of the court, catch the ball, and scoot outside to serve with power to the outside edge. Apparently human players fall for this, but the computer is a bit wiser, naturally. The silver service tip is for when you're using a bigger, slower character like Bowser. Position yourself and fake a serve to make your opponent go center, then serve down the outside. Clever stuff, proper Mario Tennis tactics there. War Turris. Finally, it's WWF No Mercy, with tips on winning triple threat matches. The trick is to let your opponents batter each other. Classic wrestling tactic really. Switch your focus between wrestlers so they don't concentrate on you. Use taunts to build up your special meter. If anyone comes your way, peg it, and they'll start fighting each other again. Then, when you've got your special, unleash it and pin whoever is losing. Good old No Mercy, still holds up, proper wrestling game that one. This page of Club 64 Tips Extra is a proper blast from the past in it. Right then, let's have a butcher's. First up, it's Super Smash Bros. Everyone was mental for that game back then. It's got tips on how to unlock characters like Captain Falcon, Luigi, Jigglypuff, and Ness. Classic stuff really, who didn't want to play as Captain Falcon? Mint they say, yeah it was pretty good alright. Then there's Excitebike 64, a bit of a Marmite game that one. Some loved it, some didn't get it. The tip here is about beat the hill climb, saying to use wheelies to get up those tricky bits. Fair enough, it could be a bit of a pain to get up those hills sometimes. Next we've got The world is not enough, the Bond game. They're giving a multiplayer tip for the submarine level, a bit of a cheap tactic apparently with the Magnum. Park yourself in the map room and wait for them to come to you, cheeky. They say close-range weapons are best in that level. Makes sense. It's all a bit tight and gritty down there. Kirby 64, the Crystal Shards is next, suggesting harder minigames for a challenge. Yeah, those minigames were a laugh, but a bit easy on normal mode. Intense mode, right? Bet that was a proper test for the hardcore players. Root. Pokemon Stadium is up next. Rent Mew. This takes me back. All about going to Nintendo roadshows to get Mew for rent in Pokemon Stadium. Remember those Mew carts? Madness. Good times battling with rental Pokemon in the Prime Cup and Gym Leader Castle. Proper nostalgia hit. New Pickener. Star Wars, Battle for Naboo then. This table here lists the Platinum Medal requirements for each level. Times, kills, accuracy, saves, bonus, lives, the lot. If you were aiming for top medals, you needed to be pretty sharpish and not get blown up too much. Finally, at the bottom, tip for the top, about Paper Mario. Ye olde Mario, eh? Go to Boo's Mansion and find a big vase to get a retro 2D Mario. Remember that? Bit of a giggle, jumping around as 2D Mario in a 3D world. Proper silly but fun. Oh, and there's a game voucher for £5 off a Game Boy Advance. Remember when the GBA came out? Mental, how time flies. The next page, we've got the Action Replay Codes page. Remember Action Replay? Absolutely essential bit of kit back then if you wanted to muck about with your games. This page is showcasing some codes for a few N64 titles. Warrington Norcus. First up, there's Donald Duck. Quack Attack. That was a decent platformer. Bit younger skewing but still fun enough. They've got codes here to unlock all bosses, change Donald's size tiny or big instant hypermood and super jump, plus infinite lives, the usual Action Replay sort of stuff. Then there's F1 Racing Championship. Not the best F1 game on the N64 to be honest, but had its moments. Codes for an instant 450 km/h boost, big score, and no checkpoint time. You know, the standard fare if you wanted to mess around and make the game a bit silly. Brenner. A Bug's Life is next. Another platformer, bit kiddie again but based on the film, wasn't terrible. A fly code here, holding R to fly, which is always a laugh. John Fontanini from Worthing sent that one in, apparently. Finally, there's Resident Evil 2. Now that was a proper game. Survival horror, on the N64. A bit of a technical marvel at the time, getting that to run. Item codes for this one. To get a lockpick, Birkin family photograph or valve handle. Handy if you were stuck or just wanted to mess about. Rupestra. There's also a list of item codes from 33 to 5F for Resident Evil 2. Red jewel, blue keycard, all those sorts of bits and bobs you needed in Raccoon City. Good times, eh? And right at the bottom there's a little cutout form to send in your own Action Replay codes to the magazine. Here's my Action Replay code, it says, with spaces for game name, effect, and the code itself, plus your details if you wanted to be featured in the mag. Pretty standard stuff for the time really. Always good to see if your cheat code made it into print. This page is from the Club 64 Tips Extra section, and it's a collection of readers' top tips, classic stuff from back in the day. Kicking off with WWF No Mercy, someone suggests playing as Jeff Hardy in a ladder match, doing submission moves, then chucking your opponent onto the announcer's table for a swanton bomb, which sounds pretty devastating. Then there are a bunch of Zelda, Majora's Mask tips, no surprise there, that game was packed with secrets. First up is a rupees cheat in Honey and Darling shop, using bombs and rolling onto the roof, clever stuff. Another one involves pressing start repeatedly to slow down time and apparently teleport people, bit weird that one. There's also a Mask of Truth tip where you can throw a dog at someone and it floats in mid-air. Majora's Mask was definitely a bit strange. And lastly for Majora's Mask, a tip about getting Cafe to come out in Zora form by hitting the bell in the laundry pool with boomerangs. For Zelda, Ocarina of Time, there are a couple of tips too. One for the Water Temple, involving raising the water level and grabbing the Triforce symbol. Standard Water Temple puzzling really. And another about doing a backflip in the Deku Tree, must be a little trick to find. Perfect Dark gets a mention with the small characters and all cheat. Always a laugh to mess around with that. Another Perfect Dark tip is about the bomb Satapi in the Chicago nightclub level. Apparently if you've been it near the fire escape you can open a door, who knew? Geezer. For Conker's Bad Fur Day there's a Bat's Tower tip. Sounds a bit risky. You're meant to whip out the bat while holding B as you fall, instead of using the flamethrower, to avoid getting hurt. Madness .c. Excitebike 64 has a wheelie mode tip. In the tutorial you just keep doing wheelies and crash at the end apparently. Road Rash 64 is mentioned, with a tip to cross the finish line as wide as possible to finish a race. Never heard of that one. Bit of a strange tip really. Super Smash Bros. Gets a look in with a big hand tip for Kirby. Transforming into stone to take less damage makes sense. Warrington to ya. Lastly, there are tips for Armageddon with a pay-per-view infinite lives cheat, useful for those tough matches, and Blues Brothers 2000, something about a sewer cover in Chicago and using a wrench to make it grey. A real mixed bag of tips there from readers, some useful, some a bit odd, just like these mags used to be. The next page showcases the Game On section, featuring 8 challenges to really test your N64 skills, right? It's all about squeezing the most out of your beloved cartridges. First up is a Majora's Mask challenge called Show Me the Money. It's a classic really. You've got to start on the first day and fill the giant's wallet with rupees. 500 rupees to be precise. No cheeky ocarina time-slowing tricks allowed, and you can't bank any money, which is fair enough, adds to the pressure. Medals are awarded based on time, with brackets like 6 AM to 10 AM getting you the top gong, then 11 AM to 2 PM, and finally 3 PM to 6 PM. It's a solid test of rupee collecting efficiency, back when Majora's Mask was mind-bendingly brilliant. Aya. Then there's a perfect dark challenge, Capture the Crate. This is a 2-player affair in the warehouse, and you've got to find a crate and lug it back to your base. Simples. Medals depend on how long you manage to hold onto that crate, 30 minutes for gold, 15 for silver, and a bronze for 5 minutes. Perfect dark multiplayer was the bee's knees back then, wasn't it? Always good for a laugh with mates. Nick? Moving on to Conker's Bad Fur Day, there are 2 challenges here. Scampering Cretin is a 4-player mode on the temple level. 3 players are gunners, and 1 is the runner who has to cross the temple entrance as many times as possible while dodging bullets. You get 10 points per crossing, and bonus points for pulling a Moonie that's ducking, for the uninitiated while crossing. Doorway Dasher gets the medals. Classic Conker multiplayer madness really. Puerkaka. The second Conker challenge is Survivor. Pretty straightforward this one. Start a new game and just see how far you can get without dying. No saving and restarting allowed, mind you. Medals are based on boss markers you reach. Hay Bale Boss, Brass Balls Boss, and the Bomb Run, in ascending order of medal quality. It's a testament to how brutally funny and surprisingly challenging Conker was. You really had to know your stuff to get through that game in one piece. This page from the magazine, right, it's all about player challenges, getting involved, showing off your skills. Club 64 they called it, 8 challenges to test the best. A bit dramatic that, you. First up, WWF Number Mercy Tabletop Tussle. Someone called Daniel Channer from Portsmouth sent this one in. Standard stuff really, put the CPU on the hardest, no time limit, hardcore rules, no interference, all that jazz. The challenge is to slam your opponent through 3 tables. Gold if you manage it by the announcer's desk, silver by the dressing room table, and bronze by the pool table. Table total for gold is 3, silver 2, bronze 1, makes sense. Warranty. Then there's Perfect Dark Perfect vs Pathetic, from Pete Hartree in Chichester. Combat Simulator, 7 meat sims on your team. 1 perfect sim target, 10-minute time limit. You're the perfect sim and you've got to command the meat sims to take out the perfect sim. A bit convoluted but alright. Win for gold, lose by 10 for silver, lose by 11 or more for bronze. Result: win, lose by 10, lose by 11 plus, simple as that. Next, Banjo-Tooie Talon Trot Trial. Samuel Walters from Cheshire came up with this one. It's in Jinjo Village. You have to activate Talon Trot and climb to the top of one of the houses with the dome on top. Analog stick and A button only, no stopping, changing direction or camera angles. Gold for 15 laps, silver for 12, bronze for 9. Total laps is the key here. Bit of a thumb workout that would be. Last one is Perfect Dark Pied Piper. Bobby Heath from Buckinghamshire's contribution, referencing Air Force One, naturally. Solo game. Air Force One level, get 10 grey-suited guards to follow you to the main floor of the plane, wave your shooter under the president's nose to get their attention, then run around like a loon until they all get taken out. Gold if you can manage to take them all out. Guards in tow, gold for 10, silver for 7, bronze for 4. Sounds chaotic. Down at the bottom, now it's your turn. Game on, in big letters. They're asking for reader challenges. Challenges wanted. Mario Kart, Battle for Naboo, Banjo-Tooie, Mario Party 1, 2 and 3 are games they're specifically after challenges for. Send them in, 100 words, 3 levels of achievement for gold, silver and bronze, to Game On, N64 Magazine, 30 Monmouth Street, Bath, BA12, BW. You could win a N64 pin badge and an action replay cartridge. Not bad. Not bad at all. October 2001 issue this is. Simple page really, encouraging folks to get involved with the mag. This page of N64 Magazine, I'm the best, is all about bragging rights and high scores, proper retro stuff. It kicks off saying new things are coming next month, classic teas to keep you buying the mag in it. Now yeah, there's a star performance bit, and this month it's San Francisco Rush 2049. Apparently loads of folks have suddenly gotten good at it. Richard Long on the Isle of Wight got a great stunt score. And Luke Wilson nabbed the Mirage joypad-shaped crown for an even better total score. They're always giving away those Mirage pads. Anyone remember them? Not exactly top off the range, but hey, free is free. Then there's a new high score shout-out for Mr. Nick Nadeau for his Banjo-Tooie minigame skills. He smashed it on the mini-sub and balloon burst games. Must have been dedicated to get those scores. Good on him. This month's score to beat is Star Wars Battle for Naboo. They thought it was a bit too easy. Typical game journos, always saying that. They want you to try and get a platinum medal on the first Naboo level. Says the info is on page 69, though magazines, always getting page numbers wrong, weren't they? You could win a Mirage joypad again for that. Same prize for everything it seems. At the top right there's new leagues for Excitebike 64 lap times and Battle for Naboo level times with kills. They always had these little mini competitions. And of course, no score page is complete without the Perfect Dark Best Perfect Agent Times table. It's crammed full of levels, best times and players. Phil Hughes from Merseyside seems to be dominating. He's all over this table. Top scores on loads of levels like Datadyne Defection, Area 51 Rescue and Escape, and even Airbase, Espionage. Tony Dunster and Paul Williams are up there too. Must have been some serious Perfect Dark sessions going on back then. It's funny looking back at these names and times, proper snapshot of the gaming scene back in the day. This page is all about bragging rights then, isn't it? A proper leaderboard page for Perfect Dark and DK64 in Club 64. Looks like Perfect Dark is dominating most of the page, with tables for pretty much every single player mission going Defection, Espionage, Air Force One, Crash Site, Extraction, Carrington Villa, Chicago Stealth, G5 Reconnaissance, Area 51 Infiltration, Area 51 Rescue, Area 51 Escape, Skedar Ruins, Pelagic 2, Deep Sea, CI Defense, Attack Ship and Mr. Blonde's Revenge. Blimey, they've covered the lot, haven't they? Phil Hughes from Merseyside seems to be top of pretty much everything for Perfect Dark show-off. There's also a good showing from Gary Carney from Newcastle and Paul Williams from Wirral dotted around too. Jan-Erik Spangberg from Sweden pops up quite a bit as well. Remember spending ages trying to get your name on these things? Good times. Then there's a section for DK64 scores, Rambi bonus game, Onguade Arena, DK Arcade, and even Jetpack and Diddy's Minecart Ride get a look in. Looks like Kieran Gorman from Dumbarton is the king of DK Arcade, with a massive 329,200 score. Jenny Gorman is right behind him, must be siblings. And Andrew Simmons from Hampshire has nailed Jetpack with a bonkers 999,995 score, must have been playing that for days. It's a snapshot of who was top of the N64 charts back in October 2001, proper old school stuff. This page from Club 64 in the magazine looks like it's all about showing off your top scores and best times in various N64 games. We've got a real mix here, starting with The World Is Not Enough, the Bond game. They've listed best times for pretty much every level in Agent Mode, Courier, King's Ransom, Thames Chase, and all the rest. Laurie Johnson and Hugo Turner seem to be the names to beat in that one. Moving on, there's Majora's Mask, with leaderboards for the Goron races, Gorman Track, Romani Ranch and even the Beaver races. Jan-Erik Spangberg is clearly a master of Termina, if he's topping those charts. Bit of a random selection of bits from Majora's Mask to focus on, mind you. The Beaver races weren't exactly the highlight of that game, were they? Then we've got F-Zero X, blindingly fast futuristic racing, remember that? This page has times for loads of tracks, Sand Ocean, Big Blue, Sector Alpha and loads more. David Van Moer and Damien Golding are proper speed demons on this, look at those times. Warrington War. Next up is Rush 2049, another futuristic racer, but this one with wings. Remember those crazy wings? Marina, Hate, Civic, Metro, Mission and Presidio are the levels listed here, with Matt Slim and Richard Long battling it out for the top spots. Finally there's Banjo-Tooie, with minigame scores, Zuba's Hive, Balloon Burst, Potto Gold, Mini-Sub Challenge, Chomper's Belly and Saucer of Peril. All sorts of daft minigames in that one. Ben Bryce and Nick Nadeau are the Banjo-Tooie minigame kings, it seems. So yeah, a good old-fashioned high score page, showing off the best N64 players at the time, in a bunch of different games. Takes you back, doesn't it? This page seems to be the reader's high score section. I'm the best, from the magazine. It's showcasing top scores submitted by readers for various games. First off, there's Mario Golf. Good old Mario Golf on the N64, a surprisingly addictive game, wasn't it? They've got leaderboards for different courses like Toad Highlands, Yoshi's Island, Boo Valley, Shy Guy Desert, and Mario Star. Looks like a Warren Big Wars Bright from Oxford is dominating most of these. Showing off, eh? There's also a Chris Webb and John G. Ham making a decent showing. Next, Super Smash Bros. Bonus one-time scores are listed. Mario, Donkey Kong, Yoshi, Kirby, Link, Fox and Pikachu all have their own rankings. Jan-Erik Spangberg from Sweden seems to be doing very well across several characters, and Phil Hughes from Merseyside is also up there. Remember spending hours on Smash Bros. With your mates? Good times. Then there's Bonus 1 Total Time and Bonus 2 Total Time, showing more scores, with Ben and Tom Rumsby from Bristol appearing. Siblings maybe? Margalisa. Moving on, there's Ridge Racer 64. This was a decent arcade racer. On the 64, they've got leaderboards split by difficulty level, novice, intermediate, expert, and then different tracks within those like Ridge Racer, Revolution, and Renegade. Jan-Erik Spangberg again is all over these leaderboards, with Kieran Warden and Ashley Wright also putting in good times. Makes you wonder how much time these guys had on their hands. Warrington. Finally, Pokemon Snap report totals, showing high scores. Andrew Simmons from Hampshire is top with a massive score, followed by Aidan Walters and Craig Yip. Pokemon Snap was a bit of a different beast, wasn't it? Not your usual Pokemon game, but still strangely captivating, trying to get the best photos of those pocket monsters. So yeah, just a typical page celebrating readers' gaming achievements, a bit of friendly competition in the N64 world back in the day. This page is all about the new Skill Club Millennium 2001, fancy name, eh? It's kicking off next month, so it's all very exciting for the younger gamers at the time. It seems to be a revamp of the old Skill Club, but bigger and better apparently. They've got 20 new challenges to have a go at. To get involved, you need to complete a certain amount of challenges to earn bronze, silver, gold, or platinum rankings. Bronze is 3 challenges, 7 for silver, 10 for gold, and a whopping 14 for platinum. You needed to send in photo or video proof of your achievements on a separate bit of paper for now, as they would have a proper form in the next issue, issue 57. They are trying to clamp down on cheat cards and doctored screenshots. Rightly so, nobody likes a cheat. If you get caught cheating, they promise ritual humiliation. Bit strong maybe? You could enter leagues in stages, starting at bronze and work your way up. Bronze, silver, gold and platinum leagues would be published in a future issue of N64 Magazine. There's also a how-to section on taking photos and videos of your gameplay, which is helpful if you were a bit clueless with tech, which some of us were back then, myself included occasionally. For photos, it's all about turning off the flash and using fast film or slow shutter speeds with a digicam. For videos, it's the usual plugging your N64 into the telly and recording on a videotape, remember those? Ah, the good old days of videotapes. Down the bottom there's a bit in red shouting, "Get playing, get playing, get playing!" They're really pushing this skill club, aren't they? Entries needed to be in before the 10th of August for inclusion in issue 60. Skill Club Next Gen, as they are calling it, will have new prizes and certificates. If you needed an entry form, you had to check out issue 57 of N64 Magazine, or just send in a bit of paper with your challenges listed for this month only. Fair enough. And there's a picture of Mario looking very pleased with himself, along with the new league's logo. All very standard stuff for the mag at the time, pushing competitions and getting the readers involved. This page is all about Club 64's Skill Club Millennium 2001 challenges. Right then, looks like they set up 20 challenges across a load of N64 games to really test your mettle. Warrington no. Challenge A kicks off with F0X, asking you to nail a 1 foot 50 inches on Porttown 2. Proof is the info screen after the race, and apparently issue 22's Double Game Guide Plus has the tips. F0X, proper speed freak racer that was, very intense. Challenge B is for ISS 2000, tasking you to finish all scenarios. You need to prove it with photos of the scenario screens, and tips are tucked away in issue 49, and the Best of 2000 book. ISS 2000, bit of footy on the N64, not bad. Tiagu. Challenge C is Battle for Naboo, wanting gold medals on all 18 levels, including the secret ones. Proof is the player select screen showing your medal count. Apparently there was a DGG Plus, with issue 57 with tips. Battle for Naboo, Star Wars Episode 1 tie-in, light gun shooter action, wasn't half bad if you were into Star Wars. The Challenge D is Super Mario 64, aiming for a 0 feet 13 inches on Princess's Slide. Proof is your time at the finish line. They even give away the cheat Z and B before the slide, then leap left and belly flop. Cheeky. Super Mario 64, classic platforming in 3D, everyone had that one. Lorth Cheshire. Challenge E is Conker's Bad Fur Day. 10 headshots against CPU Frenchies in the beach multiplayer scenario is the goal, with a photo of the stats screen as proof. Walkthroughs in issues 54 and 55 for tips. Conker, now that was a bit of a surprise, wasn't it? For the N64 anyway, very adult humor. Challenge F is Lilac Wars, get all rings and 70 hits in training mode before the all-range arena. Pause at the final ring for proof. Issue 8's free poster, or Issue 13's DGG Plus have tips. Lilac Wars, or Star Fox 64 as it was called over in the States, proper on-rail shooter, loved that one. Challenge G, Quake 2, all rings and 70 hits on the training mode, before the arena again. Proof is the same as before, for Lilac Wars. More tips in N64 33rds for this one. Quake 2 on the N64 could be a bit blurry, but it was Quake 2, proper fast FPS for its time. Decam. Challenge H, Wave Race 64, 66,000 score in stunt mode at Dolphin Park. Stats, screen photo for proof. N64 halves and issue 14's DGG Plus are your tip-off points. Wave Race 64, water racing with those jet skis, quite relaxing, well, until you wiped out. Breeze. Challenge I, Ridge Racer 64, race time of 1 foot 10 inches on Ridge Racer Novice. Record screen photo for proof. N64 41st has mark demonstrating the perfect lap. Ridge Racer 64 arcade racer ported over, nice drifting in that one. Suki. Challenge J, Mario Kart 64, 2 feet 20 inches, PL, or 2 feet 09, NTSC, on Bowser's Castle. Record screen photo again. Reviews in issue 4, tips in issue 5, and DGG Plus in issue 13 are helpful. Mario Kart 64, absolute multiplayer madness. Bowser's Castle was always a tricky track. Challenge K, for Zelda, Majora's Mask. Win as Fierce Deity Link after getting all other masks. In-game photo in Fierce Deity form is proof. Handy boss book on N64 50ths, and tips in issue 52. Majora's Mask, bit darker Zelda game, the mask thing was clever. Ricochet. Challenge L, GoldenEye 007. Survive Cradle on Zero Agent for 15 minutes. Mission complete screen photo for proof. N64 10ths, and DGG Plus, from issue 12 are helpful. GoldenEye, everyone knows GoldenEye, split-screen multiplayer define the N64. Do. Challenge M, Perfect Dark. Unlock all 43 cheats. Photos of all cheat menus for proof. Issues 44, 45, 46, and a bundled book for tips. Perfect Dark, spiritual successor to GoldenEye, loads of gadgets and gizmos. Challenge N, Banjo-Tooie, collect all 90 jiggies. Photo of the information screen is proof. Book given with issue 55 has everything you need. Banjo-Tooie, big 3D platformer, lots to explore. Challenge O, Tony Hawk's skateboarding. Unlock Officer Dick by collecting all 30 tapes and winning every medal. Character select screen with Dick, clearly visible for proof. Alan fashioned a full guide in N64 40 seconds. Tony Hawk's, proper skating game. On consoles, nailed the tricks. Challenge P, Mario Tennis. Complete the horrifyingly difficult Planet Cup with all 16 characters. Player select screen, with CPU difficulty as intense for proof. Dr. Kit's DGG Plus, as seen in issue 48, is helpful. Mario Tennis, surprisingly good tennis game. Loads of characters. Ayaki. Challenge Q, the world is not enough. Finish the game on Zero Agent difficulty. Multiplayer select screen with Golden Gun mode visible as proof. Issue 50. Plus DGG Plus, with issue 52 has tips. World is not enough, another Bond game on N64, not quite GoldenEye but still decent. Play Yanzi. Challenge R, WWF No Mercy. Defeat at least 100 opponents in survival mode. Final stats, screen photo showing wins for proof. Issue 50's Splendid Guide and DGG Plus, taped to N64 50 seconds. WWF No Mercy, wrestling game, loads of modes and wrestlers, proper button wrestlers, proper button basher. Challenge S, Super Smash Bros. Finish the game with a score of more than 1 million points. Character select screen, hold the glove over your character, and the high score for proof. Issue 37's guide lays bare the scoring system. Super Smash Bros. Absolute chaos with all the Nintendo characters, great fun. Challenge T, Excitebike 64. Unlock Excite 3D done by winning the final Challenge Pro Championship. Special Tracks select screen photo for proof. Issue 57's DGG+, overflowing with Excitebike 64 tippery. Excitebike 64, motorbike racing, bit different from the norm. Jesselgroove. So there you have it, the Skill Club Millennium 2001 challenges, something to keep you busy back then if you had all those games. Good times. This page screams classic N64 magazine, doesn't it? We're looking at the Hall of Fame section. It's all about the Skill Club Millennium Challenge, right? Seems like they had different tiers for completing challenges in some game. At the very top we have the Platinum Club, for those who nailed 14 challenges, followed by Silver for 7, Gold for 10, and then Bronze for just 3 or more. Good for them, showing off their dedication. Sure, loads of names listed under each club, looks like people from all over the UK, and even a few international entries, like someone from Australia in the Platinum Club. Names like Anthony Woods, Matthew Hall in Platinum, Jamie Chambers and Mike Richards in Silver, and Gary Carney and Jonathan Bird in Gold. Then a massive list for Bronze, proper commitment from all these players back then trying to get their names in print. Each name has a location listed, and then a string of letters after it, probably indicating which challenges they completed. It's a nice way to recognize players who were really dedicated to whatever this Skill Club Millennium game was. Not sure exactly what game it is from just this page, but it's giving me a proper nostalgic pang for thumbing through these mags back in the day. This page is Dr. Kit's Game Clinic, a staple in N64 magazine back in the day. Looks like gamers were having a right old time getting stuck in various N64 titles, bless them. First up, Jamie from Bradford is having trouble finding all the money in Conker's Bad Fur Day. Good old Conker, that squirrel was something else, wasn't he? Dr. Kitts tells him about a hidden wad of cash in the honeycomb near the wasp's lair. Classic rare humour and obscure secrets, that game was packed with them. Next, Graham Shields from Chippenham wants to unlock secret characters in Mickey Speedway, USA. Mickey Speedway, a bit of a kart racer, wasn't it? Dr. Kitts is telling him to unlock Dewey by winning gold in the first 3 amateur races, and then Louis in gold by doing the same in intermediate and amateur tournaments. Those kart races were 10 a penny back then, but Mickey's Speedway was alright for what it was. Then there's a question about Turok 2 from Stephen Warburton in Wigan, stuck on the Primogen key in the level, and there's a force field. Turok 2, now that was a blast. Dr. Kitts, sounding a bit like a sadist, basically says it's tricky and takes time, suggesting he deactivates 4 switches around the level to get rid of the force field. Cheeky da. Gavin Crompton from Edinburgh is having trouble with Body Harvest in Siberia and needs help to save the power plant. Body Harvest. That was a bit of a weird one, wasn't it? Open world action adventure, bit buggy but ambitious for the time. Dr. Kitts tells him to find 3 artifacts in Siberia and then gives him a code 1243 for some switches to save the power plant. Sounds complicated, just like that game could be sometimes. Gara. Finally, Andrew Hanna from Lockerbie is lost in Banjo-Tooie in Jolly Roger's Lagoon looking for Humba Wumba. Banjo-Tooie, now that was a proper game, huge sprawling worlds to explore. Dr. Kitts advises him to dive into the water, go through a cavern, and then find a submerged teepee for Humba Wumba. Typical Banjo-Kazooie and Tooie, loads of underwater bits and bobs. So there you have it, Dr. Kitts dispensing his gaming wisdom, helping out N64 gamers of the day with their tricky puzzles and hidden secrets. Good times, good times. And a little form to send in your own question if you were stuck. Classic magazine stuff. This page is the Club 64 directory, your one-stop shop for N64 game reviews back in the day. They've gone back and re-reviewed a bunch of games, even some from 4 years prior to this issue. Feels like a lifetime in gaming, doesn't it? They use this star mark system, out of 5 stars, to show how good they think the games are now. Apparently, if a game got a Star Game Award, meaning 85% or higher, they're still giving it the thumbs up today. Rekka. Right at the top left they've got their highly rated section, boasting the top 5 games in the directory. No surprises really. Zelda, Ocarina of Time, Perfect Dark, Mario 64, Zelda Majora's Mask and Turok 2. All absolute classics, still hold up brilliantly. Taya. Looking at some of the reviews, Crash and Burn 64 inches got a truly abysmal 3%. 1 star. Ouch. Sounds like a stinker. Then you've got 40 Winks at 71%, 2 stars, good looking, professional but totally uninspired. Sums up a lot of games from that era, didn't it? 1080 Snowboarding gets a decent 89%, 4 stars, saying it takes a while to get into but the Nintendo magic shines through. A Bug's Life is down at 31% and 1 star, called Absolutely Awful 3D Adventure. Avoid like the plague apparently. Bit harsh. Moving down the page, Aero Fighters Assault gets a mediocre 58%, 1 star, good in spells but flawed and disappointing at length. Aero Gouge is a proper disaster at 10%, 0 stars, a real stinker with terrible controls. Aiden Chronicles fares a bit better at 60% with 3 stars. Described as a slow-moving RPG, average is the word. Over to the right side now, All-Star Baseball gets a solid 84%, 3 stars, meticulously put together baseball sim. The 2000 version gets slightly less at 80%, 4 stars, not much of an update but still quite impressive. All-Star Tennis is lower at 68%, 3 stars, schizophrenic tennis game that can't decide whether it wants to be sim or arcade. Armorines gets a respectable 76%, 2 stars, tons of potential, let down by visuals. Army Men, Sarge's Heroes, is at 67%, 2 stars, brilliant idea toy soldiers, fight it out let down by sloppy execution. Asteroids Hyper 64 inches gets 53%, 2 stars, dull and repetitive arcade update for retro enthusiasts only. Automobili Lamborghini is 67% with 2 stars, not bad, just competent. Then we get to the big hitters. Banjo-Kazooie gets a massive 92%, 5 stars, deservedly so, still a masterpiece. Banjo-Tooie gets 81%, 4 stars. Rare's beautiful brand of platforming is looking slightly old hat these days. Even back then they were saying that. Batman of the Future is a shocker at 16%, 1 star. Lamentably retro sideways scrapper, that's over before it's begun. Battle Tanks scores 74%, 3 stars. Strangely compulsive multiplayer tank blaster. Battle Tanks Global Assault is higher at 81%, 3 stars. Tremendous multiplayer shenanigans marred by a boring single-player game. Finally, Battlezone, at 73%, 3 stars. Sprawling but slow, complex and uninvolving mix of Command and Conquer and Quake. At the top right they've got a little Know Your Reviewer box, listing all the initials and names of the reviewers, like James Ashton, Jonathan Davies, Marcus Hawkins, Will Weaver, Zy Nicholson, John Smith and so on. You know, the usual N64 Magazine crew. Good bunch of lads, knew their stuff. This page is a directory, a proper old-school list of N64 games ranked, proper retro style. Right at the top we've got Beetle Adventure Racing kicking things off with an 81%, a solid score back in the day, loved that for its shortcuts and details, remember that one being quite a looker. Then BioFreaks, 76%, decent score but they said it was shallow, remember thinking it looked good but never really grabbed me for long. Next up, Blastcore, blimey, 88% and a star. Yeah, that was one of the greats, wasn't it? Nintendo and Rare at their best, blowing stuff up, proper fun. Then, Crashing Down to Earth with Blues Brothers 2000, a shocking 28% they called it, as bad as the movie, which is saying something. Avoid at all costs, they reckon. Body Harvest gets a massive 91% and a star, now that was a game. Gremlin and Nintendo, remember that? Bug Bashing Mayhem, Big Worlds, proper good. And a cheat code mentioned there too, good times. Then Bomberman 64 inches at 50%, just average, tedious single player, rubbish multiplayer, bit of a letdown for Bomberman really. Bomberman Hero got a bit better at 66%, uninspiring but a bit compulsive, not as good looking as Banjo mind you. Buck Bumble on 70%, remember that buzzing bee? Dodgy graphics and controls they said, but not the worst shooter. Buster Move 2 and 3, both get top marks, 80% and 82% respectively. Proper puzzle games those, the best on the N64 they reckoned. Then we get to the wretched section, the worst games. Carmageddon 64 inches is right at the bottom at a measly 8%, blimey. Absolute dog turd is what they called it. Castlevania got 81%, pretty good, but they mention a ropey camera, those early 3D games, eh? Castlevania Legacy of Darkness, a bit lower at 75%, revamped version with extra levels, sounds alright. Centra Court Tennis at 67%, not great. Disappointing tennis game compared to Super Tennis on the SNES. Chameleon Twist gets 70%, okay-ish, decent multiplayer. Chameleon Twist 2 is awful though, 55%, short and boring. Charlie Blast's Territory at 52%, a creaky old Amiga game, Bombzool, whatever that is. Chopper Attack at 81%, simple but fun, like Desert Strike, top marks. Clayfighter 63 1/3 is a disaster at 24%, painful and really hard, avoid that one. Command and Conquer gets 75%, PC conversion, good but not amazing. Conker's Bad Fur Day is a massive hit at 89% and a star. Shoddy but fun. Movie spoofs multiplayer, remember all the swearing in that one? Cruisin' USA is terrible at 24%, just dump. Cruisin' World not much better at 38%, weird sequel. Cyber Tiger Woods Golf at 72%, wacky golf controls, sounds a bit different. Daikatana, at 67%, average Quake clone with RPG bits. Dark Rift is rubbish at 69%, uninspired and dull. Destruction Derby gets 65%, simple and compulsive. Diddy Kong Racing, a massive 90% and a star. Proper adventure mode and vehicles, but not quite Mario Kart good. And right at the bottom, Disney's Tarzan, at 35%, awful 2D platformer, bereft of imagination and utterly odious. In that wretched bit, they also highlight MK Mythologies and Power Rangers, both at 9%, then Aero Gauge at 10%, and finally Superman at 14%. Proper stinkers those must be, and they have a top tip for Conker's Bad Fur Day, something about the swearing cog, cheeky, and a top tip for Blast Corps to re-enter a race to ghost race yourself, and top tip for Bomberman 64 inches about flying, and a top tip for Diddy Kong Racing, about a fast start. Right at the bottom is Disney's Tarzan, with a top tip to just wait for go. Even the tips are sarcastic about this game being bad. This page showcases a directory of N64 game reviews from, looks like, issue 59 of the magazine. It's a double-page spread, but we're just looking at the left-hand page for now, page 84. At the top, there's a winner section. Sounds like some sort of editor's pick mentioning a chap called Andy Howells from Cardiff, coming up with top 5 linking things from N64 games and getting a copy of Excitebike 64. Bit of fluff to start, Yang. Then we dive into the game reviews, starting with Donald Duck, Quack Attack, getting a 69% and 2 stars. Simple platformer. Nothing too special it seems. Donkey Kong 64 scores a massive 93% and 5 stars. Absolutely awesome adventure, they say. And it was at the time, massive game. Collectathon to the extreme. Top tip mentions finding all 20 banana fairies. Remember spending ages on that? Inche. Doom 64 gets a 77% and 2 stars. Solid, workmanlike, and looks old next to GoldenEye. Fair enough, it was a bit of a different beast to the PC versions, not bad though for a console Doom. Dual Heroes scores a shocking 50% and just 1 star. Innovative features ruined by terrible AI, shame. Never really heard much about this one, must have been a stinker. Gay. Duck Dodgers gets a 75% and 3 stars. Let down by a duff camera, but decent Warner Bros. Platformer. Remember Duck Dodgers from the cartoons? Could have been alright this one. Kabolome hey. Duke Nukem 64 gets a respectable 85% and 3 stars. Commendably violent and enjoyable conversion. Good multiplayer. Duke on the N64, yeah, it did the job. 64. Duke Nukem 0 Hour gets a 90% and 4 stars. Third-person view, great gameplay, not perfect but very good. This one was a bit different to the usual Duke, remember it being alright, maybe a bit overlooked. Top tip mentions decapitating fire hydrants. Classy. Earthworm Jim 3D gets a 68% and 3 stars. It's Jim again, in 3D. Mediocre but enjoyably silly. The 3D Jim games weren't quite the same magic as the SNES originals, were they? Aheza. Me. BD. ECW Hardcore Revolution scores 80% and 2 stars. Fun wrestling, rubbish license, dull characters. ECW, yeah, bit of a niche wrestling thing back then. Moving on to the right side, we start with Excitebike 64 scoring a 90% and 5 stars. Delicious handling, heap of extras, one of the finest racers. Loved Excitebike 64, proper good fun, especially multiplayer. Top tip for big heads cheat. N-Lix. Extreme G gets 87% and 2 stars. Impressive face-melting speed. Tracks a bit displaced. Remember Extreme G? Fast futuristic racer? Bit like Wipeout. Top tip for keeping your race position. Wow. Extreme G2. XG2 gets 85% and 3 stars. Easier to play, better to look at, vastly improved multiplayer. Sequel improving on the first. Makes sense. Top tip for bikes cheat. Warrington Oz. F1 Racing Championship gets 72% and 3 stars. Decent, realistic racer, but not quite the splendor of F1 World Grand Prix. Lots of F1 games on the N64, weren't there? Realistically. F1 pole position gets 71% and just 1 star. Good fun in places but obvious flaws, horrendous pop-up and stop-dead barriers. Sounds a bit rough. Warranty. F1 World Grand Prix gets a massive 93% and 5 stars. Astonishingly realistic, visually stunning, shows off N64's power. Yeah, F1 World Grand Prix was a looker back then. Proper impressive graphics. Top tip for accessing the hot Hawaii circuit. Warrington Norsa has May realist. F1 World Grand Prix 2 gets 72% and 3 stars. Not enough new here. Sequelitis kicking in maybe. Warrington Norsa has maybe. FIFA 98 gets 83% and 2 stars. Promise here, not perfect but better. FIFA was finding its feet on the N64. FIFA 99 gets 83% and 3 stars. Best FIFA game yet, but no IS 98 though. The eternal FIFA versus ISS debate, wasn't it? Haka. FIFA 64 gets a dismal 39% and 0 stars. Like a rash, not enjoyable. Crikey, FIFA 64 sounds like a right stinker. Ha. Fighter's Destiny gets 86% and 4 stars. Gorgeous animation, likable characters, clever master challenge. Tekken in a very real sense. Fighter's Destiny, yeah, remember that one, bit different to the usual fighters. Top tip about the master challenge. Geni. Fighting Force gets a shocking 26% and 1 star. Dreadful 3D Final Fight ripoff. Ouch, that's harsh. Flying Dragon gets 73% and 2 stars. Fairly enjoyable but instantly forgettable. Sounds about right, probably blended into the background. Jukas. Forsaken gets 87% and 4 stars. Fabulous descent-style shooter. Great visuals. Weak multiplayer. Forsaken, yeah, proper 3D shooter. Flying around and blasting robots. Top tip for starting with all weapons. Gaia. F-Zero X gets a massive 91% and 5 stars. Fastest racer on Earth. Exhilarating 4-player. Complete all cups to access random track generator. F-Zero X. Pure speed and madness. Proper classic. Gaspy. Gets a poor 47% and 1 star. Sprang out and punched it in the face. Gaspy. Never even heard of that one. Sounds awful. Finally, Gauntlet Legends gets 81% and 4 stars. Enjoyable update of creaky old classic, terrific in multiplayer. Gauntlet Legends, yeah, good coop fun that one, hack and slash mayhem. Jai. Right, that's the whole page summarized. Seems like a good mix of reviews, some classics, and some stinkers. Pretty typical N64 mag fare back then. This page of Club 64 directory is packed with mini reviews, proper snapshot reviews for a bunch of N64 games. Classic stuff really. Kicking off with Gex Deep Cover Gecko. Poor thing only got 22%. Described as a turgid game, and to leave it to die. Ouch. Then there's Gex 64. Enter the Gecko. Bit better at 59%, but still painfully average. Seems like Gex wasn't having a good time on the N64, was he? Glover gets a respectable 83%. Praised as inspired and stonking. Remember that one? Bit of an odd platformer with the glove, wasn't it? Goemon 2 gets 69%, apparently a step back from the SNES days. Disappointing, it says. GoldenEye 007 still smashing it at 94%, called brilliant, and as good as it gets. No arguments from me there, still holds up. GT64 gets a low 67%, slow, ugly and too much pop-up, not a ringing endorsement. Hercules, The Legendary Journeys gets 66%, a Zelda clone, but without nowhere near as much depth. Hexen at 69%, fun in a retro kind of way, but hard to recommend after GoldenEye. Holy Magic Century gets 71%, RPG that could have been better, apparently with tedious random battles and Americanized plot. Hot Wheels at 61%, big jumps, big speeds, big action. Well, sort of. Sarcastic, very nice. Moving on to the right column, Hybrid Heaven gets 83%, niggly sci-fi RPG, superb story. Hydro Thunder is 84%, fantastic subwave race water racer. Iggy's Wrecking Balls gets a middling 56%, CPU opponents win every time. In Fisherman Bass Hunter 64 at 67%, comprehensive package of all things angling. Indiana Jones and the Infernal Machine gets 81%, enjoyable Tomb Raider-like, but heavily on dull platforming conventions. International Track and Field 2000 is 86%, impressive update and finger-knacking gameplay. IS and Inti 8 gets a massive 92% and a 5-star rating. Enhanced and updated. Finest football game in the world. There's a top tip for IS and Inti 8 for bonus teams, with a Konami Code-style button combo. Jeremy McGrath's Supercross gets a low 53%, uninteresting as Anne Robinson. Ouch again. Jet Force Gemini gets 93%, and another 5-star rating. Wondrous marriage of stunning looks, hectic blasting and deep gameplay. Top tip here, for dead drone ammo, and the plasma shotgun. Killer Instinct gets 62%. Great in its time, but who wants a 2D beat-em-up in the light of Tekken and even MK? Kirby 64. The Crystal Shards gets 72%. Repetitive yet oddly engaging platforming. Knockout Kings 2000 gets 82%. Unexpectedly entertaining boxing sim. Knife Edge is a low 42%. A light gun game when there isn't one. Dull. Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time is still perfect at 98% and 5 stars. Simply the greatest game ever created. Top tip for how to complete the first dungeon. ISS 2000 gets 90%. Not a huge update, but ISS 2000, complete with an all-new career mode, is still a fantastic game. ISS 64 gets 92%, almost flawless game which could only have been bettered with real teams. Top tip for super teams, with another button code. Down the right-hand side we've got the Smile feature, a bit of fluff about Team 64, and Cedric van Rossum from Belgium taking photos of them looking like fools. Then there are headshots of Alan, Mark, Andrea, Steve and Dark Mark, presumably the magazine staff. The next page, right, so this is a Directory Club 64 inches page, and it's themed tough. They're talking about boss battles, saying they build character. Right, so James Annett from Downpatrick has picked out some tough bosses, good stuff. Warrenshire. Let's have a look at the game reviews then. First up, Legend of Zelda, Majora's Mask, 96% blimey, near perfect score. Rich and inventive, they say, heart-rending moments. Yeah, it was a bit special, the Zelda, wasn't it? Top tip is about fairies, makes sense. No yo. Then Mario Golf, 90%. Solid score. Simply great fun for everyone. Yeah, Mario Golf was always a good laugh. Top tip about birdie badges, alright? No yo. Micro Machines 64 Turbo, 86%. Classic multiplayer action. Spot on. That was chaos with mates round. Don't take the shortcuts. Ha! Good tip that. Oh dear, Milo's Astro Lanes 38%. Stunningly dull. Give it a miss. Yeah, never even heard of that one. Must have been a stinker. E.T. Mischief Makers, 90%. It's retro, but it's totally rewarding. Perfect example of 2D on the N64. Interesting, maybe worth a look back then. Top tip to check out issue 12, Ta. Mission. Impossible, 75%. Horrendous AI, clunky engine and bad controls. Not so good then. Or yay. MK Mythologies, 9%. Ouch. Could only be less enjoyable if it squirted sulfuric acid into your face. Crikey, that's harsh. Too much price too, blimey. Monaco Grand Prix, 87%. Not as deep as F1 WGP, but still, tire-squealingly good. Sounds alright for a racer. Remember to use your brakes on the corners. Good advice for anyone playing a racing game, eh? Monster Truck Madness, 66%. Okayish conversion of knackered old PC game. Doesn't sound amazing. Mortal Kombat 4, 84%. The best version of MK yet. Right, so this is the one to go for then. Madness. Mortal Kombat Trilogy, 34%. This is really poor. Wealth of options can't save it. Avoid that one then, cheers for the heads up. Madness. Multi-Racing Championship, 71%. Conversion job has done it no favors. Another one to swerve then. Okay, down the side now, Lego Racers, 70%. Retro puzzler with graphics since the Commodore 64. Bit cheeky, but yeah, Lego games were a bit basic back then. Lanifital. Lilac Wars, 91%. Not as perfect as it could have been, it needed a level select. But still, another tour de force for Shigsy. Star Fox 64, yeah, absolute classic. Mario Kart 64, 91%. Fab multiplayer with some nice ideas. Mario Kart 64, everyone had that one, didn't they? Worry. Mario Party, 85%. Book an evening off, get some friends. Outrageous fun. Mario Party was always a laugh, wrecking friendships and all that. Earn 100 stars and visit the bank. Top tip. Mario Party 2, 87%. Not much fun on your own, 3 friends and you're in for one hell of a party. Yeah, Mario Party was definitely a multiplayer game. Press L while on a board and hear your character cheer. Alright. Mario Tennis, 91%. It's Mario. It's tennis. It's absolutely GOBS mackingly ace. Yeah, Mario Tennis was brilliant fun. Win the Star Cup, and then hold R to access the Rainbow Cup. Good to know. Prit. Michael Owens WLS 2000, 84%. Silky smooth, goal-drenched football game. Yeah, FIFA was getting a run for its money back then. Mickey's Speedway USA, 80%. Mario Kart clone that's short on innovation. Sounds about right, a bit of a cash-in. Piss-score game. Madden 64, 92%. Great success, but it looks a bit dated compared to NFL 99. Yeah, yearly sports games, they always dated quickly. Hidden Super Team at the Create screen. Madden NFL 99, 88%. Hires version. Also has a play editor. Team codes, throwback, hammerhead, infogame. Loads of codes there then. Lastly, Magical Tetris Challenge, 51%. Contemptible attempt to update Tetris with rubbish new shapes. Avoid please. Strong words. Tetris is Tetris, isn't it? Don't mess with a classic. Quarry. And down the left, boss characters, eh? Mizar from Jet Force Gemini, Gruntilda from Banjo-Kazooie, Whizpig from Diddy Kong Racing, Jack in the Box Fig, Rom DK64, and Octopus from Diddy Kong Racing. Yeah, some memorable bosses there, alright? Page 86, issue 59, got it. Right, on to the next one. This page is a directory of N64 games, a proper blast from the past this is. Right at the top we've got Mystical Ninja, with a stonking 90%, they reckoned it was like Mario, which is high praise indeed back then, and they're even giving away cheeky tips on how to get more coins, crafty. Then it takes a nosedive with Nagano Winter Olympics getting a miserable 32%, clearly a stinker. NASCAR 99 gets a lukewarm 59%, apparently just going round and round in circles, sounds about right for NASCAR to be honest. Moving down, NBA Pro 98 is deemed painfully average, ouch. Then NFL Blitz comes in hot with 87%, they loved the arcadey American football action, and there's a code for big heads. Always a winner that is. NFL Quarterback Club 98 is also up there with 86%, good score but apparently not quite Madden, which was the king of NFL games back then. Over on the right, Nuclear Strike gets a solid 82%, a classic updated apparently. Olympic Hockey gets a mere 60%, a cheap cash-in they reckon, which doesn't sound promising. But then Operation Winback jumps up to 83%, described as being like GoldenEye and Metal Gear Solid, strong praise at the time. Down below, NBA Courtside gets another 90%, called the best basketball game ever, bold claim. NBA Hangtime not so good though, only 52%, Toon 2 Basketball is apparently boring, maybe they hadn't played it with mates after a few bevies. NBA in the Zone 2000 is competent but not as good as Courtside. NBA Jam 99 is decent but again not Courtside level, and NBA Jam 2000 is smooth and top tier. NBA Live 99 is the poor man's basketball game, bit harsh maybe, and NBA Live 2000 with Michael Jordan is just for the fans apparently. Seems like they were really into their basketball games back then. Warrington. Next column. NFL Quarterback Club 99 gets a whopping 90%, incredibly realistic American football they said. NFL Quarterback Club 2000 is a bit of a letdown at 60%, stick to last year's version. NHL 99 is good but they recommend buying Wayne Gretzky's game instead, bit of a backhanded compliment there. NHL Breakaway and NHL Breakaway 99 are both middling, can't touch Gretzky they say again, and NHL Pro 99 is just average ice hockey. Seems like Gretzky was the don of ice hockey games back then. Finally, on the right hand side again, Paperboy gets a 62%, a simple classic, can't argue with that. Paper Mario gets another 90%, Quirky 2D meets 3D RPG, sounds interesting, they reckon it's not just for kids, probably right. Penny Racers is slow and boring, 58%, moving swiftly on. Perfect Dark Bag's a massive 96%, absolutely stunning, and a must-have, now that's a recommendation. PGA, European Tour Golf is dodgy but solid golf, 80%, and Pilot Wings 64 gets 89%, a supreme example of N64 potential, stunning visuals. They're really pushing Pilot Wings there. And on the side, there's a bit called AWRGH, about annoying characters. They've listed their top 5 most annoying game characters. Dipsy from Diddy Kong Racing, Pikachu from Pokemon Stadium, Baby Mario from Mario Tennis, Toad from Mario Party 2, and Tooty from Banjo-Kazooie. Fair enough choices I suppose, some of them can be right little pests. This page of Directory Club 64 is kicking off with a thanks section, bit of a shout out to Thomas Davies for his top 5 hero helpers whoever they are. Down the side we have character icons, starting with Bottles from Banjo-Kazooie, Cranky Kong from Donkey Kong 64, Navi from Zelda, Ocarina of Time, Floyd from Jet Force Gemini and Toad from Mario 64. Nice little roster of sidekicks and support characters there. Dear. Let's get into the game reviews then, starting with Pokemon Puzzle League, getting a strong 89% and a gold award. Top-notch tile matching, apparently, with those lovable monsters. Pokemon Snap gets an 80% and silver award, described as a gorgeous photo-snapping safari. Pokemon Stadium is up next with 90% and a gold, they're saying download your Game Boy Pokemon and battle them in glorious 3D. Power Rangers Lightspeed Rescue gets a measly 9%, and it sounds like a right stinker. Something about constipated puppetmen. Premier Manager 64 gets 82%. Footy Management, always a bit of a niche thing on consoles but apparently not bad. Quake 64 gets 79%, tidy light sourcing and polygonal monsters, good old deathmatch then. Quake 2 scores a massive 90% and another gold, saying the single-player game is a bit outdated, but the multiplayer is still good. Rainbow Six gets 87% and a gold award too, complex and hard as nails stealth action, proper tactical stuff. Moving on to the next column, Rakuga Kids scores 80%, described as adorable characters and 2D graffiti action. Rampage World Tour gets a low 54%, saying it's expensive and limited fun. Rampage 2 Universal Tour gets a dire 22%, utterly rancid they reckon, best avoided then. Rat Attack gets a decent 70%, simple puzzle action with cats and rats. Rayman 2 scores 73%, another armless Ubisoft character in another Mario clone, bit harsh maybe. Ready to Rumble scores 81%, cartoon boxing fun. Resident Evil 2 gets a fantastic 90% and another gold, super scary and shortlisted for Game of the Year, always a classic that one. Revolt gets 73%, better than average racing. Ridge Racer 64 gets a massive 91% and a Platinum Award, stunning graphics, and the greatest hits package of Ridge Racer, always a solid arcade racer. Road Rash 64 gets 68%, solid but unspectacular. Ointwayas. The final column starts with Roadsters at 80%, not perfect but quick. Robotron 64 gets 75%, an update to the arcade classic. Rocket, Robot on Wheels gets 88%, and a Silver Award, the most original 3D platformer of its time apparently. Rogue Squadron gets 85%, and a silver rattlingly good Star Wars combat flight game, great graphics and sound. Rugrats in Paris gets 67%, a sparse collection of minigames. Rugrats Treasure Hunt gets a very low 48%, a rip-off of Mario Party, crud. Rush 2, Extreme Racing, USA gets 73%, love it or hate it racing. San Francisco Rush gets 82%, gravity-defying leaps and rattling top speeds. Finally, San Francisco Rush 2049 gets a massive 91% and Platinum Award, super fast futuristic racing with tons of exploration. Loads of games covered on this directory page then, a real mixed bag of quality as you can see. This page is a directory of N64 games, like a snapshot of what was hot and what was not back in the day. Right at the top we have Super Mario 64 feet with a whopping 96%, still considered the king, and rightly so. Everything after owes something to Mario 64 for bringing platformers into 3D. Then there's Shadow Man at 93%, a dark and gritty action game, they call it unmissable, and they weren't far wrong, that voodoo vibe was pretty unique back then. Silicon Valley, at 91%, gets called the most original console game ever, bit strong maybe, but it was a clever game with body swapping mechanics, definitely stood out. Super Smash Bros gets a 90%, proper party game that one, everyone loved a bit of Smash Bros with their mates. The New Tetris with 88%, and The World Is Not Enough, also at 88%. Tetris is Tetris, isn't it? But the James Bond game, The World Is Not Enough, got a good score, must have been decent for a Bond tie-in back then, likely chasing that GoldenEye shadow. Snowboard Kids gets 86%. Mario Kart on ice they say, yeah pretty much, a bit rough around the edges but a fun racer. Then there's a bunch in the 70s and 80s. Scars at 79%, futuristic racer like Mario Kart but apparently better alternatives exist, bit harsh. Shadows of the Empire at 78%, Star Wars Snowspeeders and Space Battles, let down by lackluster Doom-style bits, right? Doom was setting the bar for FPS games then. South Park at 73%, a first-person shooter, basic they say, and Tetrisphere at 69%. Confusing and complicated for Tetris, sounds about right. Moving down the page, South Park Chef's Love Shack gets 83%, and South Park Rally 88%. South Park was really hitting its stride then, games were everywhere, and getting decent scores it seems. Star Wars Episode 1, Battle for Naboo gets 78%, Rogue Squadron style game they reckon, tasty but just misses the mark. Episode 1 tie-ins, always a bit hit and miss weren't they? Star Wars Episode 1, Racer gets 88%, blindingly fast future racer, yeah that pod racing was a spectacle in the film and game. Supercross 2000 only gets 76%, more than passable bike sim, not exactly glowing praise. Right at the bottom, poor Superman with 14%, do not, repeat, do not buy this, ouch. And Taz Express at 27%, utterly hateful. And Scooby-Doo, classic Creep Capers at 23%, dire resi ripoff that's abysmal. These are the games best forgotten, eh? Shadowgate 64 feet at 43%. Old school RPG that'll see you drifting into a deep slumber. Sounds less than thrilling. Starshot Space Circus Fever gets 78%. Former that's been predated by Banjo. Yeah, Banjo-Kazooie kind of defined platformers at this point. There's a bit in the corner about sandwich fillings. Someone called Kent sent in his top 5 sandwich fillings, and they're taking the mick: ham and pickle, turkey breast, jam, strawberry, ham and coleslaw, and corned beef, proper British sarnies, but bit random for a games mag. And a competition to win an N64 game. Fill in your top 5 favorite anything to enter. Sounds like they were running out of ideas for content. This page is from the Directory Club's 64 section. Looks like a review roundup of N64 games. We're kicking off with Family, which is a bit of a laugh, matching up N64 characters with supposed lookalikes. They've got Kirby and Jigglypuff together, Samus and Captain Falcon, Bowser and Shrek, Banjo and Conker, and then a real head-scratcher with Drowsy and some bloke called Mark Green. Right then, onto the game reviews themselves. Jukus. Starting with a couple of right stinkers at the bottom of the list. Tigger's Honey Hunt, 36%, and Tom and Jerry, Fists of Furry, 35%. Tigger, well, it was always going to be a bit kiddie fodder, wasn't it? Disney platformer. Probably best avoided unless you were really desperate. Tom and Jerry Brawler sounds awful. Duff Cartoon Scrapper they call it, I can believe that. Moving up, Tonic Trouble, 55%. Ubisoft platformer, vaguely remember this one, described as occasionally fun but uninspired, which is never a good sign. Then we're into some better stuff. Tony Hawk's Skateboarding, 86%. Now this was a proper game back then. Skateboarding games were having a moment, and Tony Hawk's was the king. Very playable, they say. Emphasis on tremendous stunt work. Yeah, spot on. Spent hours trying to nail those combos. Top Gear Overdrive, 79%, and Top Gear Rally, 86%. Racing games, obviously. Top Gear? Bit of an arcade racer. Arcade standard visuals, they say. Top Gear Rally was a step up. Some of the fastest, most realistic driving ever. Then Top Gear Rally 2, a stonking 90%. Brilliant rally game. Random track generator. Sounds like they really nailed it. Turok Dinosaur Hunter gets a massive 91%. This was a big deal when it came out, Turok. Dinosaurs and guns, what more could you want? Screen-filling dinosaurs, ludicrously bloody violence, yeah, that sums it up. Turok 2. Seeds of Evil gets even higher, 95%. Wowzers. Must have been something special. Breathtaking follow-up. Turok 3. Shadow of Oblivion dips a bit to 82%. Brilliant in places but plain tedious in others. Fair enough. And Turok, Rage Wars, 87%. Immensely enjoyable deathmatch shooter. They really milked the Turok franchise, didn't they? Twisted Edge, 60%. Snowboarding game, amateur snowboarding outing. Sounds a bit average, to be honest. Vigilante 8, 74%, and Vigilante 8 Second Offense, 69%. Car combat games, like Twisted Metal clones. Average Twisted Metal clone for the first one. Polished looking but ultimately tedious update for the sequel. Seems like they didn't quite hit the mark. Virtual Pool 64, 77%. Pool game, surprisingly playable pool sim. Not exactly setting the world on fire, but probably decent enough if you liked pool. V-Rally 99, another 90% score. Finally, the N64 gets an arcade racer to compete with the PlayStation's best. Big words. Sounds like a proper arcade racer. YLI Country Club Golf, a low 49%. Golf games, never really my thing, golf, but golf that looks like it's been through a meat processor. Ouch, Bekaka. War Gods, even lower, 46%. Fighting game. Once you've sampled all the characters' delights, the novelty soon dissipates. Not a good sign for replayability then. Wave Race 64, a solid 90%. Thoroughly realistic water effects, yeah, it looked amazing at the time. Wave Race was always a good showcase for the N64. Wayne Gretzky's 3D Hockey, 75%, and Wayne Gretzky's 3D Hockey 98-70%. Ice hockey games. Sheer whiz-bang puck-zipping magic for the first one. Is it really different enough to warrant buying? For 98, sounds like more of the same. WCW Mayhem, 78%, and WCW/NWO Revenge, 75%. Wrestling games. WCW Mayhem is lightning quick but disappointingly lacking in moves. WCW/NWO Revenge, plenty of new characters and faster gameplay. Wrestling games were always a bit hit and miss. Akingi. Finally, Toy Story 2, 71%. Platformer, surprisingly good 3D platformer, with fun levels and sturdy puzzles. Toy Story games were usually alright, weren't they? So, over Take. All, a mixed bag of reviews here. Some absolute classics like Turok 2 and V-Rally 99 getting top marks, and some real stinkers down at the bottom. Good old N64, you could always find something to play, even if it wasn't always a masterpiece. The next page in the magazine is the Club 64 directory, and this is where they list out loads of N64 games and give them scores, always handy to see what's worth a punt. At the top they've got a Weetrix review, scoring 74%. It's described as a decent Tetris-style puzzle game, with a water theme. Nothing too groundbreaking, but a solid enough time waster, I reckon. Next up is Wipeout 64, getting a respectable 88%. They reckon it's the best futuristic racer on the system, sounds and looks great. Which, yeah, it was pretty slick back then. Warrington Nulcrew. Then, World Cup 98 gets a 73%, not exactly setting the world alight. They say it's competent, but a bit sluggish and frustrating, which sounds about right for licensed footy games of that era. World Driver scores a whopping 91%. They call it superb with amazing graphics and good tracks. I remember that one being a bit of a looker, definitely stood out visually. Worms Armageddon bags 85%, a brilliant conversion from the PC. Multiplayer was where it was at with Worms, good for a laugh with your mates. WWF Attitude gets 88%. They say it's the closest you'll get to real wrestling on the N64, with a creator player mode. I recall that being alright, but maybe a bit clunky compared to later wrestling games. WWF Number Mercy gets a mega 92%. They call it a huge improvement, and packed with options. Yeah, No Mercy was the king back then, everyone went nuts for that one, still holds up pretty well even now. WF Warzone gets 85%, a fat fest of fighters with lots of characters, sounds like a bit of a button masher but fun with mates. WF Warzone gets 80 fighters. WrestleMania 2000 scores 90%, they call it the best wrestling game yet. Bit of a wrestling game overload here, must have been the flavor of the month at the time. Xena Warrior Princess gets 81%, described as a fast-paced beat-em-up. Never played that one myself, must have been a bit niche. Finally for the reviews, Yoshi's Story gets 86%. They say it's beautiful but lacks longevity. Yeah, it was pretty and all that, but maybe a bit too easy and short for the price. Below that they have an import releases section, games not yet out in the UK. There's a long list of titles like 64 Sumo, Air Border 64, All-Star Baseball 2001, Animal Forest, which I think became Animal Crossing later on, and loads more Japanese titles I've never heard of. Guessing these were the games you had to really hunt for, if you wanted something different. Then on the right-hand side, there's a section called GBA Play, talking about Game Boy Advance games. You're lucky to have a mag to read, they say, because the GBA is the hot new thing. They've got a top 5 of GBA games. Number 1 is Mario Kart Advance. Number 2 is Castlevania Circle of the Moon. Number 3 is F-Zero Maximum Velocity. Number 4 is Choo Choo Rocket Import. And number 5 is Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 2. Good little snapshot of what was good on the GBA at the time. The rest of the right side of the page is just a massive directory listing of loads more N64 games, with scores and issue references. Titles like Denryu Ira Arabu, Dazimon 3D, loads of Doraemon games which were probably Japanese only, Dr. Mario 64, Fighter Destiny 2, and loads more. It's a proper long list, good for checking out if a game was reviewed, and what they thought of it if you were thinking of picking it up. This page features a bunch of N64 game reviews, typical stuff from back then really. NBA Courtside 2 got a decent 87%, which I suppose was fair enough, it was alright for a basketball game on the N64. Neon Genesis Evangelion, or rather a game based on it, scored 61%. Not amazing, but maybe enough for fans of the anime. NFL Blitz 2001, predictably, did well at 78%. Those Blitz games were always a laugh with mates. Pure arcade football. Nightmare Creatures got a 57%, remember that one being quite dark and gothic, maybe a bit clunky though. Ogre Battle 64 scored a solid 87%, that was a strategy RPG if I recall, probably quite niche but well regarded by those in the know. Pachinko World 64 got a low score of 12%, not surprised, Pachinko on the N64? Really? Pikachu Genki Detchu with 75%, well, anything Pokemon related was popular, even if it was a bit odd sounding. Genki Detchu. Pokemon Stadium G/Esh got a whopping 90%, no shocker there. Stadium games were always good for battling your pocket monsters in 3D. Polaris Snowcross with 57%, snowmobile racing, seemed a bit generic at the time. Power League 64 got 42%, probably not one of the better sports games. Power Pro Baseball 4 and 5 got 54% and 78% respectively. Must have been some difference between those two baseball titles. Puyo Puyo Sun 64 got a respectable 80%. Puzzle games were always good on consoles, especially with multiplayer. Rally Challenge 2000 scored 61%. Racing games were 10 a penny on the N64. Ready 2 Rumble Round 2 got 76%. The boxing game with the cartoonish characters was a decent sequel. SimCity 2000 got 83%. A classic city builder, probably worked alright on the N64. Sin and Punishment got a fantastic 89%. That was a Japanese import title. A proper hidden gem and a bit bonkers. Snowboard Kids 2 got 87%. Snowboarding games were all the rage then. This was a colourful and fun one. Snowspeeder got 71%. Based on Star Wars. Racing through snow, likely a bit average. Space Invaders got 78%. The old classic, probably a retro remake or something. Spider-Man got 78%. Superhero games were getting better at this point. This one was probably tied into a film or cartoon. StarCraft 64 got a 78%. A massive PC strategy game ported to the N64. Must have been a bit clunky with a controller. Star Soldier got 62%. Another retro title perhaps, maybe a shooter. Super Bowling got 72%. Bowling games, always a bit of filler. Super Robot Spirits with 58%. Likely a Japanese robot fighting game, probably a bit niche. Susume Tyson Puzzle Dama got 79%. Another puzzle game, Japanese sounding title. Tamagotchi World 64 got 79%. Tamagotchis were still kicking about, so a game made sense, probably aimed at younger players. Tetris 64 got 49%. Tetris is Tetris, can't go too wrong. Tokon Road got 42%. Another one I don't recall much about. Top Gear Hyperbike got 64%. Motorbike Racing. Triple Play 2000 got 50%. Another sports title, probably baseball again. Trump World got a very low 21%. A Donald Trump themed game? Sounds awful. Virtual Chess got 72%. Chess on a console? Standard fare. WCW. Backstage Assault got a poor 46%. Wrestling games were hit and miss. This sounds like a miss. Wheel of Fortune got a terrible 17%. Game show times were rarely good. Wonder Project J2 got 55%. Another Japanese title, probably a bit obscure here in the UK. WCW Nitro, another wrestling game, got 42%. Loads of games there, some decent scores, some not so much. Typical magazine reviews really. There's also an advert for King Cat. Looks like they were selling Dragon Ball Z stuff. And games, action figures, all sorts of merchandise. Seems like they were big on imports and anime stuff. And a tiny advert for ringtones. Remember paying for those? 60p a minute. Daylight robbery. This page is the subscription form for N64 Magazine. Right in your face is a massive picture of Mario, trying to tempt you to subscribe. As if we needed much persuasion back then, eh? It details how to subscribe by post, giving you the address to send your form to. You could pay by direct debit, check, or credit card. It's all pretty standard stuff for ordering a magazine back in the day, nothing too exciting. But essential if you wanted your monthly dose of N64 goodness delivered straight to your door. Remember filling these forms out? Seems ages ago now. There's also a phone number to call if you missed an issue, and the website address for subscriptions. It's all very clear and straightforward, designed to get you signed up without any fuss. This page is all about getting you to subscribe to N64 Magazine. They're offering a deal where you get 13 issues for the price of 9, and it'll set you back just £7.25 every 3 months if you pay by direct debit. They're really pushing the boat out with this offer, saying you get 4 issues for free delivery to your door in the UK, and even a free gift. Looks like they're chucking in either a double game guide or some kind of special N64 giveaway with every issue. They're even trying to tempt you with pictures of Zelda, Majora's Mask and Pokemon Gold and Silver guides and a perfect dark sticker kit as potential freebies. And of course there's a picture of Yoshi dressed up as a pirate, which is a bit random, but hey, it's Yoshi. They're laying it on thick, saying you'll never miss an issue and there's a risk-free guarantee if you're not happy. Pretty standard subscription spiel really. This page is teasing next month's issue, blimey. Next month, things get really tasty. It screams in big red letters, promising to be live from SPACEWORLD. Space World, remember that? Nintendo's big show. Massive deal back then. Bigger than E3 if you were a proper Nintendo fan. Guri Spears. They're promising the latest GameCube news from Japan, which is what we all wanted to hear, wasn't it? GameCube was just around the corner, and we were desperate for any info. Playtests of every single game there? Bit of a stretch probably, but it sounds good. Hundreds of new screenshots, yeah right, maybe dozens, but still, we'd lap it up. And of course, that classic line, plus an extra special surprise. Always with the surprises, weren't they? Below all that hype, there are some screenshots. First up, Luigi looking proper spooked. That's gotta be Luigi's Mansion for the GameCube. Looked great at the time, a bit different from your usual Mario stuff. Then we've got Fox and some dinosaur bloke. Star Fox Adventures, yeah, Dinosaur Planet originally, then shoehorned into Star Fox. Rare, weren't they? Going a bit different direction, but still looked decent enough. And lastly, looks like something a bit darker, Roman soldier type. That's Eternal Darkness, isn't it? GameCube exclusive, scary as anything, proper mature stuff for Nintendo, a bit of a surprise back then to see them doing something like that. Right at the bottom, N64 Magazine, the UK's best-selling independent. Independent it was, and pretty good for its time, to be fair. Issue 59, page 96. They were really pushing the GameCube buzz, weren't they? Trying to keep us N64 owners interested, while dangling the shiny new GameCube carrot in front of us. Clever marketing, I suppose. This page is the front cover for issue 60 of N64 Magazine. Right then, it's screaming about a staggering new-look issue, as if they've reinvented the wheel or something. Apparently they're giving N64 a spring clean. Bit late for spring, mind you, it's October, but alright. Any new look is spore. They're promising a Skill Club Next Gen, which sounds like some sort of competition, new and improved tips and cheats. Well, they always say that, don't they? Bigger, better special investigations, pumped up Planet GB, and the classic line, still, the only reviews you can trust. Bit cheeky that last one. Game-wise, they've got a few big hitters plastered across the cover. There's Turok Evolution, that was looking pretty tasty at the time. FIFA 2002, can't go wrong with a bit of footy. Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 3, which was the one everyone was waiting for after the second one blew up. They've also chucked in Spider-Man, the movie game, Super Mario Advance 2, which is a Game Boy Advance title. Funny they put that on the N64 mag cover. And David Beckham's Soccer. Bit of a mixed bag, to be honest. And then there's a big yellow plus sign with a massive question mark, teasing a top secret free gift that you absolutely cannot afford to miss. Always with the mystery gifts, aren't they? Probably a sticker or something. Lastly, they're reminding you to don't forget they're on sale Monday the 24th of September, which was last month at this point, considering it's the October issue. Marketing, eh? Right at the bottom it says October 2001. Another issue of N64 Magazine then. Let's see what's inside. This page is a right old advert for the Pokemon trading card game, you know, the one with the bits of cardboard. They're pushing this thing called the Southern Islands collection. Apparently there are 18 unique cards, and they are making a big deal about how they were only available in Japan before, which is always a bit of a hook in it. 6 of these cards are special reverse holofoils, whatever they are. Sounds a bit fancy for a kid's card game, and they reckon 3 of them are going to be pivotal in gameplay. Right, but it's not just cards. Oh no, you also get postcards, booster packs, and card sleeves, all bundled up in a stunningly designed binder. Sounds like a right treat for the collectors. You could apparently grab this lot at Electronics Boutique and Game, naturally the usual places. And if you were completely lost playing with bits of paper, there was a game support line to call. Good for them, I suppose.